us to keep moving forward. Good evening and welcome. This is the second Noise Task Force meeting on Wednesday, September 11th, 2019. We'd like to begin with a moment of silence for all of those who lost their lives during the horrific attacks of September 11th, 2001, just 18 years ago. Would you join me in a moment of silence in remembrance of all who lost their lives? Thank you very much. The second item of business on the calendar tonight is our roll call. Jean, would you please call the roll?
Certainly, Madam Chair. What I'm going to do for this, since this is the first time we've done a roll call, is I will state the agency for whom you represent, and then you would answer by saying your name. City of Burbank.
Emily Gabel-Luddy.
Sharon Springer.
City of Glendale. City of Pasadena. Office of Congressman Adam Schiff.
Mike Aguilera-Gaudet.
Office of Congressman Brad Sherman.
John Brodke.
Office of Congressman Tony Cardenas.
Leah Gonzalez.
Office of Council Member Nuri Martinez.
Marcos Sanchez.
Office of Council Member Paul Krikorian.
Paul Krikorian.
Office of Office of Council Member Paul Koretz.
Paul Koretz.
Office of Council Member David Rue.
David Rue.
Office of Senator Dianne Feinstein.
Peter Muller.
Office of Senator Kamala Harris.
Vanessa Alderetti.
Madam Chair, we have a quorum. I would also like to take this opportunity for everyone on the table supporting this event to also state your name and who you represent. We'll start with the airports table, please.
Flora Margaritas with the Van Nuys Airport, Los Angeles World Airports.
Patrick Lammerding with the Hollywood Burbank Airport.
And FAA, please.
Raquel Gervin, Western Pacific Region Regional Administrator.
William Freeman, Community Engagement Officer.
Nope.
Can't hear him.
No.
Hey, Mike. We will. We're learning to operate these.
Test. Hear me?
No.
No? Let's try again.
Test. Can you hear me? Woohoo, good.
Ian Greger, Communications Manager.
Is that everyone? Yes. And my name is Gene Reindell with HMMH. I am the task force facilitator, and next to me is Justin Cook, also with HMMH.
We have a quorum.
Yes, we do
Thank
have a
you,
quorum.
Jane. I'm going to take a few minutes. I'd like to remind everyone who came here tonight about the meeting ground rules. When we started 2 weeks ago, we made a decision that our core values reflect respect and listening to one another. And I believe everybody on this task force is prepared to do that, and I ask all the audience to be prepared also. We do appreciate all of you taking the time to be here. We know that you take time away from your family, and so your commitment is important to us, to this mutual process. We know you're here to help support us to go through this process. We want to continue to work together in a respectful and collaborative way. Throughout this task force, the meeting facilitator, HMMH, will be evaluating plans and determine their feasibility. It's important to remember that both the Burbank and Van Nuys airports and the aircraft operators do not determine how an aircraft departs, including how quickly and how sharply they can turn and at what elevations. Ultimately, we want to ensure any new procedures are safe and thoroughly evaluated. This is a focused meeting with a strict 3-hour time limit. There will be discussion and public comment. They are restricted to the issues on aircraft operations and ideas to alleviate noise. To encourage and respect expression of all views, meeting rules prohibit clapping, booing, or shouts of approval or disagreement from the audience. This task force will be most productive in a collegial and respectful environment. And I want to thank all the task force members for agreeing to accelerate and meet 2 weeks after the initial meeting. Any abusive or demeaning behavior will not be tolerated. If we have a problem, I will close this meeting. There is a public comment period on each meeting's agenda. Once we've established how much time we have for that public comment period, I will, with the help of staff, determine the maximum speaking amount of time for each speaker. The agenda for subsequent meetings will be distributed 72 hours prior to the meeting and made available on the Hollywood Burbank Airport's website and also on the Van Nuys Airport's website. We're going to move to the item that's called approval of the agenda. In order to facilitate more task force member discussion and have a chance to pose questions for HMMH and the FAA to analyze for future meetings, there's been a request to modify the agenda and move items 7 and 8 before item 6. Item 7 is the task force or support staff comments, and item 8 is discussion of the next meeting date. Is there any objection from the task force members to doing this? Do any of the voting task force members object to doing this? I see consensus. Therefore, we will move items 7 and 8 before item 6. Okay, for Jean and Justin, please note that the agenda has been modified. Let's move on to the consent calendar, which is item number 4 on the agenda tonight. The consent calendar may be enacted in one motion. Jean, would you please read the consent calendar?
Certainly, Madam Chair. On the consent calendar for tonight is only the one item, which is the task force meeting summary for August 28, 2019.
Is there a motion to approve?
I'll move to approve it.
Is there a second to approve the consent calendar?
Was Paul?
There is a motion by Vice Mayor Springer and a second by Councilman Krikorian to approve the consent calendar. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Are there any members not in favor? Are there any abstentions? We're going to move to item number 5 of tonight. Item number 5 are the community group presentations. Groups are limited to 15 to 20 minutes, and task force members cannot take action on any matters raised during these presentations at this meeting. Amanda, do we have any speaker cards for this item?
We do not.
Okay, then the presentation will be followed by task force or support staff questions or comments. And as a reminder to everyone, we are all in a focus meeting with a strict 3-hour time limit. This meeting will end at 9:30. We now have 2 community group presentations from the Encino Neighborhood Council and Uproar LA. Councilman Koretz.
The Encino Neighborhood Council wasn't ready to present, and they would like to ask that we move them to the next meeting's agenda.
Without objection, we will move the Encino Neighborhood Council to the next meeting of the task force for their presentation. Thank you. We are going to hear from Uproar LA tonight, and I am going to allow 15 minutes for presentation, and she said she has a tight 5 minutes recommendation, so a total of 20 minutes. We want to give each group equal time, and we might have more than one group presenting in the future. In the event of that, the time to present will be determined by the number of groups that wish to present, and it will be between 15 and 20 minutes. So I want you to understand that tonight we have one group, in the future we'll have more, and so the time will be allocated based on the number of groups present to present. Representatives from Uproar LA, you are free to begin when ready. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting us to present. Uproar LA is here to present the negative impacts of the new flight paths out of Burbank Airport and the impacts that have been visited on LA residents. It's probably difficult for those of you on the panel to see, but we've got a PowerPoint presentation that illustrates our points. Uproar LA is made of LA residents who are committed to stopping the narrow, low-altitude next-gen flight paths over our schools, homes, and neighborhoods. We come from all over the San Fernando Valley, Toluca Lake, North Hollywood, Studio City, Sherman Oaks, Encino, and all along the Mulholland corridor. We also have a large number of parents because 10,000 school children now go to school under these new flight paths.
So our supporters constitute the new community that the FAA is supposed to protect from a shift in noise per FAA policy. And in your binders, that's tab 2. I put our citations, so some of these I'll tell you where to turn to. We had no notice in violation of NEPA and the FAA policy. If you look at tab 3, that map, which is also up here, shows the only depiction of SLAP and OROs in the Southern California Metroplex. And if you'll notice, none of them indicate a path going south. No community in the San Fernando Valley has ever lived under a path like we live. Hundreds of aircraft, concentrated route, and shockingly low altitudes. How much more efficient is this? Well, according to the FAA, the airlines will save a whole $40,000 per year in fuel savings doing this to us. And that's tab 4. It strains credulity to believe the long, indirect U-turn and sometimes complete loop realizes those efficiencies. If you want to look at tab 5, we provided some examples of those flight paths. The Office of Inspector General found in an investigation published last month that the FAA's claims of increased safety were not supported by any evidence. Quote, "The FAA has not established a process to measure or track the safety benefits because it states these benefits are difficult to quantify." That's tab 6. This new community has been decimated by these proven flight path changes. The FAA's own documentation shows a southern shift from the southernmost Burbank departure flight tracks that coincide with the time Metroplex procedures were implemented. The southern shift has been admitted to by the FAA and the Burbank Airport Authority, tabs 7 and 9. We have been forced for years to even get the FAA and Burbank to admit that the flight path moved. I just selected some, good examples. So they're from FAA in 2017, bottom line, no change. FAA 2018, flight paths have generally remained within the same lateral and vertical confines of the historical track data. And FAA in 2019 to Mayor Garcetti, since Metroplex, the changes in the number of aircraft that fly south of the 101 freeway have remained relatively consistent. Even now, after admitting that the path has shifted over the new community, Burbank staff and Burbank Authority continue to mislead the public and the press about it. Quote, "The analysis portion will let us know what, if anything, has changed and why those changes have occurred," end quote. And that was 2 weeks ago. The authority sent letters to the airlines, which we appreciate, but in it they said quote, "The authority is mindful that some homeowners believe that departing flights from Burbank are drifting south." This was August in 2019. Okay. So I asked the FAA what happened, because in June of 2018, Upper LA got an email from the California Public Records Act request, and in it, it says, quote, "The FAA confirmed that the intent of the new procedure is to pull flight tracks back over the 101 and 405 freeways as they make their turn to 210 degrees and subsequently to 270, which is interesting because that's what we've all been trying to get to happen. So in June, it was supposed to happen. The other thing is that the phrase pull flight tracks back, by definition, means that it's been moved and it's going to be restored to the original path.
This new, narrow, low-altitude, next-gen flight path over our community has unleashed devastating noise, pollution, and fire risk impacts. The path is narrower than ever before. It's not dispersed. We are getting hundreds of planes a day. The FAA themselves have referred to these new flight paths as jet superhighways. Those are their words. And the flight path goes over raised terrain, which represents an elevated fire risk. I want to show you a short video now. It's a time lapse of 30 minutes. You can see a repetitive pattern here.
Non-stop.
The rising terrain of our new community puts it well below the FAA's safety ceiling of 3,000 feet, which exposes everyone to greater air pollution. It's generally agreed that particulates at 3,000 feet and below, instead of mixing with the upper atmosphere, fall to the earth. They fall on plants and the terrain or onto people. Airplanes emit ultrafine particles, and there's more information on that in your binders. As anybody knows, ultrafine particles are incredibly unhealthy. There are also more studies in the appendices of the binders, but once an ultrafine particle enters your body, it doesn't exit. We know that exposure to constant planes shortens life. A 2018 study on a next-gen path over Queens found that it actually lopped a whole year off a person's life. The FAA has shown in past projects around the country that they do not account for noise impact or terrain when planning new flight paths. For example, quote, "The FAA does not use noise monitoring to validate its modeling tools on an individual project basis." The FAA's noise model definitely failed to consider the rise in the terrain in the mountains in our new community. And consistently, the Doppler effect and the echo impact are ignored. Even FAA Regional Administrator Raquel Gervin acknowledges that different criteria, as yet undefined, are needed for noise-sensitive areas within national parks, national wildlife refuges, and historic sites, where other noise is very low and a quiet setting is a generally recognized purpose and attribute.
So these are noise impacts. They're studies. They'll be in your binders. Airplane noise increases risk of cardiovascular disease. There are proven associations between chronic aircraft noise exposure and hypertension in adults. Undisturbed sleep is a prerequisite for high daytime performance, well-being, and health, and aircraft noise can disturb sleep and impair sleep recuperation. And all of us here are experiencing a lot of these issues, and we never experienced them before. The FAA is hiding the harmful impacts. The FAA has been conducting a new survey on noise at 20 airports across the country for years and has yet to make the findings public. Why? Well, we've got a confidential Airports Council presentation on the FAA's results. Quote, "Indications that the survey results will show communities are significantly impacted by noise in areas beyond the 65 DNL. That 65 DNL is the tiny little area around the airport and nowhere near all of us. Quote, "Found that aircraft noise annoyance is higher today than shown in previous studies." And quote, "Particularly true at airports which underwent an abrupt change," which again is us, all of us sitting here with no notice, suddenly. Oops, I'm missing my thing. At our own expense, members have rented a professional-grade NTI analyzer with a Class 1 microphone to record and measure the jets because the FAA and Burbank Airport have yet to do so. We are getting regular readings of 74 to 79 decibels in the short amount of time that we've been recording them. And 65 is the standard for around the airport before they start doing the soundproofing. Our long-term solution is FAIR. F, fan out the departures, disperse it across a wider area to distribute the jet noise, unlike what we're all living with now. A, ascend faster to minimize low-altitude jet noise and toxic exhaust. And I note that almost everybody up on that panel has endorsed ascending faster, including the mayors of Burbank and Glendale and Pasadena. I, include the San Fernando Valley community in solving the problem, which this is a really great start. I hope that this is the beginning and also this process will be the end to what we're all suffering from because this has already been way too long. R, restore. restore the original flight paths that shared the impact of the San Fernando Valley jet noise fairly. It's been admitted to that it's shifted by the FAA and Burbank, and all of us here know that it's true. So you need to restore what us as a new community are suffering from, and don't do this to anyone else either.
Fix it now.
Okay. The task force has the tools to do this. First, there should be a moratorium on the flight management system by the airlines, as it may be contributing to this problem. And you'll see in the last tab in your binder that that's in the Landrum and Brown report, and also internal emails with Burbank. They've cited that as a potential reason, and that's a very easy fix. And now I want to present Dan Fager. He's going to discuss the rest of his interim solutions, which Uproar LA and Studio for City for Quiet Skies fully endorse.
Thank you, Mr. Fager.
Thank you. Let's see how I click this.
Mr. Fager. Good evening.
Madam Mayor, members of the task force. I've shared with you a comprehensive task force strategy, and in that strategy, it has a suggested strategy, has suggested areas of concern that should be tackled by this task force. These three objectives or three operations are described as Operation Twist, turn west immediately, spread the tracks, Operation Quiet, question, understand, investigate, explain, and think, and Operation Jet Noise, JT and Teagan north of 101, stop expansion. Tonight I just want to talk about Operation Twist. It's a list of 6 interim measures using existing FAA procedures that result in aircraft climbing as fast as practical and making turns to the west before crossing the 101 freeway. They can be implemented now before completion of environmental studies. Implementation of this phase of the strategy would twist the aircraft sooner to the west over pre-next-gen historical flight tracks to avoid sending aircraft south over communities on or below the Santa Monica Mountains. Because weather, payload, and aircraft performance characteristics all affect how and when an aircraft reaches a specified altitude, this would continue to provide a fanning out or dispersal of flights as they turn to the west. The specific measures are one that you should do, if you would be so inclined, is ask FAA to conform to already existing FAA policy of establishing minimum vectoring altitude, MVA, using 1,000 foot above obstacles for non-mountainous areas versus 2,000 foot for mountainous areas, and revise the MVA chart that the controllers in San Diego use to direct flights. Ask ATC Air Traffic Control to expedite delivery of vectors as soon as the aircraft reaches the revised MVA. Ask Air Traffic Control to instruct aircraft to immediately execute the turn to the west as soon as the radar vectors are provided. Ask FAA to issue a NOTAM to initiate the turn from the 210-degree heading as soon as physically possible, with the objective to be able to turn to the west before crossing the 101 freeway. 5, ask the FAA to issue a NOTAM to establish a higher minimum climb rate to reach the revised MVA sooner. And 6, ask the airlines to use a higher climb rate to ascend to the revised MVA as soon as physically possible, with the objective to be able to turn to the west before crossing the 101 freeway. The FAA and the airlines are already twisting some flights to the west. It happens every day that some of the flights turn at altitudes as low as 2,100 feet. They don't wait till they get to 3,000 feet before they turn. Most of the flights that depart, in fact, hit 3,000 or more before they begin the turn. And that's something this task force needs to understand from FAA, why that happens every day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you all hear me? Yes. Thank you for that presentation. Thank you for the notebook and some additional exhibits that we also received. Is this part of Uproar? There are some.
That is not,
something
Madam
else.
Chair.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Jean. I wish to ask our task force members, and I think I'll begin with our facilitator. Do you have any questions that you want to ask of the presenters this evening, Uproar LA, for any further clarification?
Madam Chair, actually, we found the presentation pretty clear and concise, especially at the end with the recommendations, and we have no further questions at this time.
Very clear presentation. Thank you.
Will we get the PowerPoint slides?
Let me ask the presenters, will you make those slides available to us? I believe, and I can ask our airport authority and Van Nuys, we can put those up as part of this evening's presentation.
Yes, if we receive them, we can post them on the website.
That would be incredibly helpful. Thank you. Task force members, do you have questions of the presenters this evening based on what you heard? Any further clarifications that you'd like made for your benefit? Yes. No, Mr. Brodkey has a question. Councilman Rue, you have no questions at this time. All right.
Just a point of clarification. I understand Mr. Fager presented to us one of 3 sets of ideas. Will he be available to present the other 2 of the 3 he highlighted at a later date?
Yes, we had to split time, so whenever the next meeting is, when Studio City for Quiet Skies presents, they're going to attach him like we did for the long-term solutions.
That is very helpful. So this evening, your presentation has to do with interim solutions.
Right.
Studio Cities for Quiet Skies, which will follow subsequently, we'll talk about long-term solutions.
Right, correct.
Yes, Vice Mayor Springer.
Thank you very much for the notebook. In the notebook, are there maps that show the neighborhoods that are affected?
It's, I mean, the front one where it shows all of our members shows that, but the FAA has lots of documents where they have lots of tracks over all of us. But it really, I mean, it's pretty much, it's Toluca Lake, Studio City, Sherman Oaks, Encino, and then a lot of times it goes down the corridor, Mulholland corridor, and hits parts of, you know, Beverly Hills, LA, Bel Air. It's a big loop or arc.
Thank you.
Sure.
Are there any further? Yes.
Multiple times you referenced the historic or original flight paths. Do you have those maps as well?
Well, there are not a lot of maps because most of us here didn't think about planes 2 years ago. We have a lot of data now from our over 1 million complaints of all the planes that are above us, and I could tell you airlines and things like that. But the important thing is that the FAA has admitted it in their executive summary, and they have the documentation that shows that it shifted. I think it was like 1.5 nautical miles south. And also the Burbank Airport has that data because their own commissioners have written in resolutions that it's shifted south. And Landrum and Brown, although it looked at 10 years, if you actually look at the real data, it was the last 2 years that they studied that the shift happened.
So the date, do you have a date for us then for those paths? So if we're to understand what you mean by an original historical path, is there a date or?
Well, that's a trickier question. So I think that what most communities that are going through this across the country will tell you is that it's flown before it's permanent. It became permanent in 2017 in Burbank Airport. 2016 was the SoCal Metroplex, which did all 21 airports. But the Landrum and Brown and also the FAA study shows that it was at the time of implementation that this southern shift happened, but the FAA's paperwork claims that you can't say that that's Metroplex, it was just coincidental.
Okay. One thing, are there other questions? Any other task force members at this time? Thank you. Would you remind me again which tab has information about the implications of not dispersing flight patterns?
Okay, oh, sorry. It was so the specific, there are a couple studies. There's one at LAX, USC did one, and then the specific, it was called the tennis climb out of Queens by the Columbia School of Public Health, and that is tab, let's see, 20 is the USC one, and 21 is, it's called the trade-off between optimizing flight patterns and human health, a case study of aircraft noise in Queens.
Thank you.
Sure.
Do task force members have any further questions? Yes, Councilman Koretz.
I don't have a question for the presenters, but some of the things that they have said would lead me to ask questions of the FAA. Do we have the...
We have,
Unfortunately, I wasn't able to make the last meeting, so I don't know. Do we have the ability to follow up and...
yes. So I'm going to turn to the facilitator again to restate how the FAA is brought into this process to respond to questions that are raised.
Yes, so we actually have an agenda item where those were meant to come into play, which is why we wanted to, it's why it was requested to put item number 7 before, or to actually follow the presentation, because once we close out item 6, or item 5, we would go into item 7, which is your opportunity then to ask questions of the FAA and/or HMMH, knowing that the responses to those questions would be provided at a subsequent meeting.
Okay, so I'll be happy to ask questions under that item.
All right. Are there any other questions at this time? Then I'm going to move on to item number 7, which is the section of the agenda this evening, Councilman, that you were just asking about. We're going to move to task force or support staff questions or comments. And so my question is, do any of our task force members have questions they'd like the FAA or HMMH to answer at subsequent meetings? All right, all three of you. Councilman Krikorian, Councilman Koretz, and then the representative for the congressman.
Well, thank you very much.
And Councilman Rue, third one to ask.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to our presenters, especially for the binder of detailed information that all of us have before us on the panel. I'm going to have a lot more as we go through, and I apologize that I didn't have my written questions ready for tonight, but I'll be submitting those to staff for further response by the next meeting. But to start off with, what I'd like to get a report back on from the FAA and from our collective staff is a report back on the feasibility of all of the interim solutions that had been proposed by Mr. Fager, and specific recommendations for ensuring their expedited implementation to the extent that they are feasible, and we'll have that discussion at the next meeting. I'd also like to have a response from the FAA about Uproar's comments regarding the safety analysis of Metroplex implementation. And although this wasn't exactly a part of the presentation, I know that, or I understand that for many years, the option of eastward takeoffs was largely ruled out from the airport because of perceived risk that would happen because of proximity to the Verdugo Mountains. And because, and also I'm being serious, I'm not being facetious about this. I would like to understand, if that is true, then why is that risk not also applicable to the Santa Monica Mountains as the planes take off to the south? And I'd actually like to have a comparison of those, of the geography, the safety issues, the engine failure potential issues, all of the factors that go into that sort of safety analysis. I'd like that to be reported back to the task force.
Okay.
More to come, but that's what I have for the moment.
Those are your questions this evening. Then I'll go to Councilman Koretz, followed by Councilman Rue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I didn't really bring prepared questions either, but just listening to the testimony made me think of a few. One, it appears that the FAA is violating its own rules. So I would ask how and why they would be doing that. Number two, it appears that no one ever reviewed the potential impacts, and if that was done, withheld it from the public. And if they did an adequate review and found what people are actually experiencing, they're literally ruining people's lives. And with the low flights over the mountains, they're also harming wildlife. And having spent about 10 years working on creating wildlife corridors in the hills of Los Angeles to protect some of our endangered species, like our local LA area mountain lions, we have heard anecdotally that has changed their patterns, that they're avoiding some of the spots where the planes and helicopters go as low as 150 feet or lower because they're trying to avoid the plane patterns. Why didn't the FAA and perhaps the airports let the public know that this was happening and have them have to discover it and realize it as the problems became worse and then didn't halt? Why did the FAA not do a pilot program, since this is a problem nationally and people are having similar experiences in airports across the country? Why didn't they do one or two and actually test the impacts? Does the FAA have old maps of the old flight paths and maps of the new flight paths? And can both of those be released to us? Are they aware of the fire danger, especially with low-flying planes and even lower-flying helicopters? And helicopters do seem to crash on occasion, and a crash into the hillside could, at the wrong time of year, cost lives and billions of dollars. And lastly, in a situation like this that is so devastatingly bad, is there a reason why we wouldn't just say, okay, we totally screwed up, this is devastating thousands of people.
Ladies and gentlemen, I know Mr. Koretz represents all of you. Let's let him finish.
And why don't we start the process of planning for your new system by going back to the old routes first and then working out from there?
Please continue. Do you have more questions, sir? Councilman Rue. Followed by the congressional representative.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My staff's going to pass out, and I really want to thank both Burbank and Van Nuys airports for meeting with me and giving me presentations and answering a lot of my questions. I think we generated more questions than answered. And I also want to thank the public for coming out today, and I really want to thank Uproar LA for
Thank you.
The presentation. And I think it was already asked, I look forward to getting a copy of the PowerPoint. So I have a letter here. I was able to write down some of the questions. I actually have 25 questions that I'd like to submit, 14 on general aviation questions, 6 on the Burbank Airport, and 5 on Van Nuys. And I actually would like to add 2 more questions to Burbank Airport. Well, actually, I want to clarify Councilmember Krikorian's question in particular, where I want to specifically say what was presented by Mr. Dan Fager. And just to preempt the future discussions, his presentations, is twist, question, and jet noise possible? Is it possible to do? In particular for twist, is it possible to do at Burbank? And the additional 2 questions I want to add to my questions that I just circulated was, I guess I'll call it 17A because it pertains to question number 17. With question number 6 in mind, can SLAP 1 and OROS 1, OROSZ 1 waypoints be moved to be over the 101 freeway? So I want to add that question. And obviously, people don't have a copy of my questions. Question number 6 is asking for, are there altitude and safe distance requirements for incoming and outgoing flights that must be met when aircraft is departing, ascending, or being vectored, and what are those requirements? So that's why that question is important to answer first before 17A gets answered. And I also want to ask, add one more question for the Burbank side. And it was presented by Mr. Dan Fager again. I want to get that question answered. If you could explain exactly, some of my questions allude to this, but I want to make it even more simpler. Explain exactly what happens between liftoff and 3,000 feet. And if you could explain all the different protocols associated with all the vectoring and all of that. So those are the 2 additional questions I'd like to add to my questions that I submitted. And I'm sure this will be available online for the public to see as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Aguilera.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The first 2 questions I had come out of the Transportation OIG report dated 27 August 2019. The first is, it notes there that in 2015, the FAA established the Noise Steering Committee to address environmental noise-related issues associated with PBN. Would it be possible to get more information about that committee or any work product coming out of that committee to aid us in our effort to find solutions in this task force? Anything. We were looking, my staff, I have a staff. I was looking online and could not find anything on this particular noise steering committee. So any information would be possible, Dr. Gervin, to be fantastic. The second is in that same report, it notes that benefits analysis is becoming better using the joint analysis team, and that in Southern California, that joint analysis team was deployed in 2018. Is there any update on when we can get that cost-benefit analysis information, the new information from the joint analysis team when they're looking at specifically Southern California region, so we can look at the costs and benefits associated with this, with these procedures? And then the last thing is, would it be possible to get, along with the maps of previous and historical flight paths and current flight paths, to get specifically the procedures, all the procedures that are coming out of this project that are coming out of Van Nuys and Burbank, so we just know, just all have a common analysis of what exactly we're talking about. Thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions? Vice Mayor Springer.
I would like to know the impact of heat and weight on altitude and at what point a plane can turn. And do flight paths, altitudes, and the turning radius or the location of the turn change seasonally? And I would like to see if there's a correlation between the climate, the temperature, and flight altitudes and the flight patterns. Thank you.
Other task force members? Yes, sir.
Thank you. I had a bunch of questions that I think have been asked already, so I won't ask them again. But I will. There were 2 specifically having to do with the climb rate for airplanes as they are on takeoff. And I'm curious, what's the standard climb rate? Is there a policy at the FAA for climbing at a certain rate? And then secondly, the question, the recommendation about asking airlines to use a higher climb rate. I'm just curious, do airlines have a choice in that, or do they follow the direction of air traffic controllers on that question? Thanks.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Springer.
Specifically, I'd like to know, does it change in the wintertime? The flight paths, altitudes, the lift, the rate of ascent?
Thank you. Microphone. I
It's
think,
on.
did you, it's on. She asked if the rate of ascent and the turning changes in the wintertime. No. So that's the question that she's asking. Okay, I want everybody to have a chance to speak. I want you all who wish to speak tonight to have that uninterrupted opportunity to do it. So holding up your signs is perfect. Shaking them is perfect. It works. We see it. There you go. Thank you. I wanted to follow up. Let me ask one question. The inclination, not the inclination, the early morning departures from the Burbank Airport and the Van Nuys Airport and the continuing departures throughout the day, I would like to know more about how those are interrelated because of the volume of traffic in the air. I know that at 7 o'clock, the planes at Burbank are ready to go, and they do take off, one after another. I am interested in the flight patterns and departures for the remainder of the day, whether there's fewer flights on the weekend, what the biggest, I'm going to ask you to, I have done my due diligence and I am continuing to do it. I am not unaware. And then the busiest time during the week. But I think most importantly, I'm interested in how the vectors and the departures relate to one another, including the arrivals. And I think HMMH and the FAA should be able to suss through that so we can get closer to proposals such as we saw this evening. Yes, Councilman Koretz.
Just to follow up on a question that was asked. So I think the question is, who determines how quickly a plane can ascend? Is it the airlines? Do the airports themselves have a say in that? Or is it purely the FAA? Where do the abilities to affect that fall?
I believe I understand what you're saying, yes. Councilman Krikorian.
Thanks. If I can just kind of dovetail on that. I've sent a list of questions relating to takeoff procedures and what the airlines' ability to do is in that process to the airlines themselves, to Southwest at least, and the others will get it as well. I'd like to make that, I don't have it with me unfortunately, but I'd like to make that a part of the record so that we can also get FAA's responses to those same questions so that we hear both from the airlines and from the FAA, and for that matter from airport staff as well as to who is responsible for what portion of that and how is it feasible to make certain changes. And if it's not, who is saying that it's not? Is it the airline? Is it the FAA? Is it the airport? So I will make that a part of the record of this meeting, if I may.
That's your question, entered into the record this
I
week.
have the letter to Southwest. I'll just enter that into the record of this, and then if we can get responses to all those questions. Also, for the FAA, I submitted a Freedom of Information Act request in October of 2018. I received a partial denial of that request in December of 2018 and inadequate responses. The City Attorney of Los Angeles then submitted an FOIA appeal in February of 2019, indicating that the withholding of information that I had sought was improper. I would like to, in the context of this task force's meeting, to again reiterate the Freedom of Information Act request that I had made and ask that the FAA provide the documentation that I had requested to this task force as well as to my office so that we have all of that information before us as well. Next, with regard to the proposed Burbank Airport replacement terminal, I think it's important that we start talking about this in the context of our work. I'd like to understand, because the NEPA process is coming to a close, I'd like to know what anticipated changes there will be in number of flights and types of aircraft if the replacement terminal is built. And I'd like to know what baseline for air traffic is being used in the environmental analysis under NEPA right now. What are the baseline traffic numbers and the dates of those baselines so that we can compare what we're analyzing in the NEPA process and what the folks who are sitting here are actually experiencing?
Okay. Fair enough. Do task force members have any other questions of either HMMH or to be asked of the FAA? Yes, Mr. Aguilera. Get
Thank
that
you,
mic.
Councilman. What is the feasibility of deploying our own noise monitors to these areas?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that for me? For my benefit.
The request is for the feasibility of deploying our own noise monitors to these areas.
All right, if there are no other questions, and I'm sure there will be questions in future meetings, this is a process that we're trying to move together ahead as quickly as possible. I'm going to move on.
Madam
to-
Chair, if
Yes,
I may.
Mr. Ritchie. Yes,
There
Chief.
were mention of possible other written questions to be submitted or comments. If I could ask that they be submitted within a week so that we can get those into the record and to the right people to evaluate those.
And what would be the best way to implement that? To direct it to the chair? Direct it to, how should I get those to? Is there a preferred method?
Through Patrick, I would say, Lamberding from Burbank Airport, Hollywood Burbank Airport.
Okay, I'll go ahead and send it to you and then copy the chair if that's...
That's fine. In my communications, what I have tried to do in the past is send something to Jean Rendell. I'm going to be sending things to Patrick Lamberding, but I'll CC those of you who are involved in that communication that I've received. And I believe I did it with Mr. Krikorin and Mr. Rue recently. So
Thank you.
we'll send it to Patrick, and then he will disperse it out to the right people. And if you CC me, I would appreciate it. Thank you. Now let me ask, are we finished with number 7? Item 7 on the agenda tonight. Everybody submit your written questions within a week. It'll be very helpful for all of us. I'm going to move to item number 8. This is an item to discuss the next meeting, the date, the time, and the location. Based on the holidays that are coming up and the general availability of our technical staff and task force members, at this point, October 17th looks like the next date that is good for us to gather again for the 3rd task force meeting and hear presentations. I'd like to ask task force members if we have an agreement that October 17th it's the next readily available date for all of us to assemble. Vice Mayor Springer.
I have a question about October 5th. I know that was being considered Saturday, October 5th. Is that not possible?
I believe, based on the feedback that was given, not everyone is available for October 5th, and we would not achieve a quorum. I believe that the next readily available date is October 17th. So I want to ask task force members if you would be available, and can we reach consensus on that date?
And if I may, Madam Chair, it seems like that meeting, the bulk of that meeting will be community presentations. Am I correct that that's what we anticipate?
We anticipate, but we don't completely know.
Okay. That date doesn't work for me personally, but Mr. Mensman will be able to fill in for me, right? Yes, so that seems like a fine date, but I just want to make sure that if we are going to be doing community presentations on that date, it would obviously be important to make sure that the community presenters are available as well. But tentatively, that seems fine to me.
Councilman Kretz?
Currently, I have conflicts, so I may or may not be able to make it. I will try to change those conflicts out.
All right?
But
That would be wonderful.
Yeah, I'll send a representative if I can't, but it wouldn't be ideal for me.
Councilman Rue?
Yes, I won't be available that day. My staff could come, but also I've just been informed that the Sherman Oaks Quiet Skies Coalition will not be available that day to make a presentation either. So I don't know if
Yes.
they get moved on to another meeting or if there will be another opportunity for them to present.
I think it's all of our understanding that we're going to afford groups the opportunity to present. And if they're not available specifically on that date, they have an opportunity at a future date to make a presentation. So there will be opportunities. And in my communication with some Burbank residents, I also told them there would be these opportunities. I would just say the sooner the better for all of us, but there will be opportunities, sir.
Could I propose, if possible, I don't know, I know that these dates were worked in. What about October 16th, the day before?
We do not have the complete availability of individuals on the 16th for a quorum. Let me ask the task force members then, is there, and I'm going to look at the date. Is there consensus? Hold on, please. Okay, thank you. Ms. Sheehy told me that October 30th is the next available date.
30th?
I think, frankly, I think we should go for the 17th and give it our level best to get there. We will have a quorum at that time.
Well, I'm available on the 30th, but it's a
prefer the
delay,
30th.
obviously, which isn't great. Is there a sooner date? Closer to October
No.
10th?
October 17th is the next available date.
So, if I may, Madam Chair,
Yes.
even if we delay this meeting, folks, it's not going to slow down the work of this task force because this is going to go on for multiple months. So whatever day we pick in October, whether it's a week earlier or a week later, we're still going to continue the work after that. So it's not going to delay the ultimate outcome. It's not ideal, but that's the way it is, especially when you're dealing with, multiple scheduling demands of elected officials and different cities and staff and community groups. It's just, you can't schedule those on the moment that you want to have it. So, but it's not going to delay the ultimate work of this committee, this task force, because we already are planning to continue to work on this in November and December and so on. So I would be able to be present on the 30th. That, if Mr. Kritz, if that's, it would be better for me. That would be better, but I don't know if it's available for staff or the room is available or anything else. But if that is an option, I would prefer it.
Well, my recommendation is that we table this, ask our staff to quickly check with all the principals who are present to see if that works. If it doesn't, would the task force be willing to go forward with October 17th? So what I propose that we do is, let me ask again, we're working together. I would like to ask who would be available for the 17th?
You're not?
Yes, Councilman Rue.
Again, I just want to make clear that myself, Councilmember Krikorian, and Koretz will not be available that day, but our staffs can be available.
Correct.
And
All right.
I also
All
want
right.
to echo.
Please, ladies and gentlemen.
I also want to echo what Councilmember Paul Krikorian stated. We want to try to resolve this issue as soon as possible, but clearly this is going to take more than 2-3 meetings. So I think it's also in our interest to make this meeting go forward. I've met with many of the coalitions here. I think we're all available to meet separately. Additionally, all the information that gets presented here, our staffs will give us copies and brief us as well. So I really think it's important that we move the meeting forward so we could get through all the presentations and get answers to our questions answered. But I mean, if we move it to the 30th, I'm fine with it. And I could be there, I could be present on the 30th, but I do want the audience and I want the community to know it only delays and this whole process.
But it doesn't. It doesn't, because we're still
It
going to
delays
continue
us
to meet in
2 weeks.
November and so on. So delaying that meeting doesn't delay the process.
No, I am fine with October 30th. All I'm saying is it will push back that meeting, which will subsequently push back the next meeting.
Doesn't have to. We can
such.
meet a week after that in November. I mean, there's no reason that that has to.
I'm fine with October 30th. I could be present on October 30th.
Let me ask all the principals who are presently here, are you available on October 30th? No. So my suggestion is that we schedule it for October 17th. We move ahead with presentations that can be put into the record, that the staff who are present will prepare the kind of questions that are expected to be asked, and that we do that as a sooner rather than later business. Is there consensus from this task force?
So if we're going to do it on October 17th, we've already submitted a lot of requests for reports back and so on. Would it be our expectation that those reports back would come back at the next meeting, or would that require more time to get the reports back?
That's a fair question.
That's question number one.
Based on the number of questions and comments that were made today, I would suggest that some of those would be prepared for the next meeting, but it's probably going to take a little bit more time to answer all of those questions. Plus, it's going to take time to prepare the presentations to actually answer those questions as well. So if we have 3 or 4, community presentations next month, which I think is most important that we get done as quickly as possible, that we may not have enough time for all the responses, but they will be being prepared. They have the questions, so they can continue working on those.
Okay. I agree that getting the community presentations as quickly as possible front-loaded into this process is important. I also think that it's important that we have substantial time as task force members to be able to hear the responses to our requests from FAA and from staff, and then be able to kind of go through a discussion process based on those responses and ask follow-up questions and so on, which I would envision to be an entire meeting by itself. I'd be hesitant to crowd that in with limited time because we have multiple community presentations. I would think it would make more sense. Let's do the community presentations, as many of them as we can, at the next meeting, and then let's spend some time actually with a back and forth of questions and getting a little bit more in-depth into responses from staff at a meeting to follow. But not have that compete with the public input that comes from the community presentations. I would think that would be a more efficient way to proceed.
In light of those comments, it sounds like we will not get responses to some of the questions that are either submitted today in writing or presented during the presentation. It sounds like there could be some answers to some of the questions. We could hold off on any answers or responses to the questions that we're asking and that the presenters are going to ask until we're all able to be together to listen to that, as you suggest, Councilman.
Yeah, and when it comes to the community presentations, I think I've had many of them already, in my office, and I'd be happy to do that independently as well, so that if it's the desire of the task force to move forward with the presentations on the 17th, My staff will be here, but I will also receive them personally at any time they would like to come into my office to do that. And then at a meeting, hopefully pretty soon after that, sometime maybe in early November, I would like to be able to have the opportunity to have the back and forth with staff, asking the questions that, getting the responses from staff to the questions we've asked today and that we will be putting on the record, and then having the opportunity to follow up. But I'd really like to be able to do that personally.
No,
So if that report comes back at a meeting when I'm not available, I would prefer to change that meeting date. So if we're not going to do that on the 17th, then the next meeting after that, I think would be the appropriate time to get those responses back.
Then I think it's a great idea for council members themselves who wouldn't be here to make themselves available to listen to any other presenters, as you suggest, that we move to the October 17th date to bring in as many additional community presentations as we can, recognizing that answers to those presentations won't be available that night, and answers to the presentation given tonight will not necessarily be available that night, that will hold the responses for a task force meeting when all the principals are able to attend.
And maybe we should just set that next meeting now too, if we can, so that we have plenty of lead time. If we're able to do that with staff, I mean, I think, I know it's hard when you got this many people to try to compare calendars, but it's not going to be any easier if we put that off until the next meeting. I mean, so whether we can do it on the spot now or do it soon, I would rather schedule both of the meetings at the same time. And I don't know that needs to be an agendized item for discussion at the next meeting before we do it. Let's just compare our schedules and then try to set that among us. I don't know that really needs to be something that's agendized and goes through the formal process of notice and so on before we just pick a meeting date.
I would suggest that we agree on October 17th this evening.
Okay.
I would suggest that at that meeting, we make every effort to schedule something as quickly after as possible, enabling everyone to attend. That means everybody who's part of this task force. We have many, many people on this task force, and let's give them the opportunity, let's afford the staff the opportunity to talk to all the members and see what the next available date would be for all of us to be present.
Okay, then if we're going to go through that process, I get it's not agendized for tonight, and maybe this is something we do in the future, but rather than making it our process to set the next meeting at each meeting, at the next meeting, perhaps on the 17th, can we agendize setting all of the meeting dates?
Yes.
So that
I think
the rest of the meeting set for the whole task force, because I mean, honestly, it's just easier for us to do it that way so that we all know in advance and we can plan for it, and it's easier for the public to be able to participate as well if we know well in advance.
I think that's a great idea.
Actually,
Yes, Councilman Rue.
Actually,
Please.
Madam Chair, I was going to recommend the same thing, but actually, can we just have the facilitators contact all our offices and get all those dates in advance so we could just make the announcement at the next at the 17th meeting?
We can try that as well.
So we don't personally have to do it, but all of our various teams could get together and pick the various dates for the next, I don't know, 5 meetings or so.
We'll do our best. But I think the idea of trying to schedule more ahead of time is a good one. And I think that the staff will be very busy trying to accomplish that. Jean, do you have any comments on this methodology going forward, since you have facilitated many of these meetings?
Actually, what came out was what I was going to recommend, and that is that we set the next meeting today, and that we quickly get to consensus working outside of this venue to find the next 3 or 4 meeting dates.
Great. Do I have consensus on that approach? Do we agree on that approach? Thank you. Thank you. So that's what we're going to do. We are going to have our next task force meeting on October 17th at 6:30 p.m. at the Burbank Marriott Hotel. We will agendize more community group presentations for that evening. If you'd like to present, would you please contact your local council member, elected representative, and let them know. I would encourage you to let them know that you're interested in presenting by October 1st, even though we recognize that the actual presentation won't be completed and made on October 17th. That will afford the staff an opportunity to figure out how many groups and how we organize the meeting for maximum progression in this task force effort. The next item on our agenda is our public comment period for items that were not on the agenda this evening. I want to ask Amanda, how many speakers do we have?
We have 65.
All right, and how much time, given the remaining time?
90 minutes.
Sorry?
90 minutes.
So each speaker has 90 seconds? Yes.
Correct.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to move to public comment. I want to tell you that your voice is important. I want to ask again that you refrain from clapping and booing and making comments while a speaker is making an effort to speak. I'm going to adhere to the 90-second timeline in order to afford everyone who is here an opportunity to speak. I know that this is important, so what Amanda will do is announce the first 5 names to speak, and if you would please queue behind the podium and be prepared to make your comments. She will also keep time. There is a timer that's readily visible from the speaker stand, and so let us begin that part of the process this evening. Amanda.
Okay, we're going to begin with Lynn Rembert, Buzz Wolf, Steve Hampar, Jeff Rode, and Elizabeth Hawley.
Hi, my name is Lynn Rembert. I'm a member of the Toluca Lake Homeowners Association. We have gathered here today to find some answers to the noise problems emanating from the Hollywood Burbank Airport. Excuse my bag. The task force knows what the problem is. They know about the noise, the quality of life, the pollution. We need to work the problem. We need to come up with solutions that they can take to the FAA. As Uproar LA did today, they need to have something to say, FAA, do this. And the task force, you know what the problems are. Change the flight path, take off to the north, turn sooner, return to the pre-NetGen flight patterns where it was spread out instead of narrowed down to the current path. In other words, we need to go back for the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Buzz Wolf.
I've been editing, so forgive me. I thought we had 3 minutes, and I applaud you for
Mr. Wolf, I'm going to ask you to speak way into the microphone so we can all
I
hear.
applaud you for getting your schedule together. I hope you have better luck in actually solving some of the problems that the task force faces. All right. Burbank Airport sent a letter to the FAA as a proactive, representing it as a proactive step for all of us, asking for information about FAA proposed changes to Van Nuys Airport departures. Noise invasions into our neighborhoods have very little to do with Van Nuys Airport. It's mostly a commercial jet issue. Commercial jets don't fly out of Van Nuys. They never have. And the noise abatement problem is based in Burbank, and it always has been. Recently, the mayor used the term separation in support of NextGen. Going back a few years, the custom and practice for flight controllers
You have 30 seconds.
for Burbank departures was for decades to instruct pilots to make their northerly turns over the 101 freeway. They seem perfectly capable of creating separation without having aircraft fly south by instituting flight paths similar to NextGen. Nary a miss. Why fix something that isn't broken? May I point out the recent pledge by members of the Business Roundtable signed by 181 CEOs of America's largest businesses, which redefine the purpose of a corporation to being, I quote, committed to leading their companies for the benefit of all stakeholders, customers, communities, and
Your
shareholders.
voices, thank you, thank you.
When you wake up tomorrow,
Will you
look
call
in
the
the
next
mirror.
speaker, please?
Steve Hampar.
Hi, I'm Steve Hampar, president of the Toluca Lake Homeowners Association. We've heard from many of our residents in our community, and they're quite upset about the obtrusive and loud noise from the new flight paths from the Burbank Airport. At times, there is a constant barrage of planes. The noise is adversely affecting our quality of life. The noise is adversely affecting our quality of life. The Toluca Lake HOA supports the fair solution, most ideally restoring the original flight paths. We are hopeful the FAA hears our pleas. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Jeff Road.
I want to talk about fire risk. My name is Jeff Road, and I live under the new Burbank and Van Nuys Airport takeoff tarmacs that the FAA, Burbank Airport, and Van Nuys Airport have created at the very top of the Santa Monica Mountains along the Mulholland Corridor. And I'm here to tell you, the airports, and especially you over there, the FAA, very loudly and very clearly that you are all playing with fire. You are literally playing with the safety of our lives. These new departure paths that the FAA has created out of both airports direct mostly northbound flights far south at very low altitudes, making low, slow, thunderous U-turns, crossing over the very high fire severity zone Santa Monica Mountains. That's what California calls them. These super low U-turns have turned the mountain into a de facto takeoff runway by moving the runways from the two airports and placing them directly over heavily populated, very high fire severity zone mountains and canyons. And this is south of Burbank and Van Nuys airports. I'm going to go to the end here. To the FAA, Burbank and Van Nuys airports, you have been warned, and right here you're on camera, you're on notice. And to you, Ms. Gervin, please stop using the very high fire severity zone Santa Monica Mountains as your takeoff runway for Burbank and Van Nuys airports. You are going to cause a disaster that results in massive loss of property and human lives. Ms. Gervin,
next speaker, please.
And airports,
next speaker, please.
You have been put on notice
Next
in front of
speaker,
all the people
please.
here and the city of Los Angeles.
The
We
next
need
speaker is
relief.
Elizabeth Hawley. After her will be Christine Kim, Vicki Herman, Cindy Essen, John Vernagas, and Jeff Jacobs.
Good evening.
Good evening. I'm Elizabeth Hawley. I'm with the Valley Industry and Commerce Association, also known as VICA, representing businesses and nonprofits across the Valley. And I want to start by thanking the task force for reconvening so quickly after the first meeting. We all have an interest in establishing some facts and coming up with some recommendations to the FAA to address the concerns raised, while understanding that the flights that operate out of Valley airports are quite literally bringing investment to our communities. And I also want to note that the tenants and operators that I've met at each of these two airports do care deeply about the organizations in which they live and they work. Many operators regularly take part in outreach, supporting local nonprofits, many of which you work with. And they also help local students explore careers in aviation. So that's the type of work that they're doing for the Valley. So we thank this task force and the community groups that have come to present today and to speak, to work together to develop some kind of a workable solution to protect our neighborhood and the ability of our airports and the airlines that operate out of them.
You have 30 seconds.
To continue their history of service to our communities. It's a good start. We want to give this task force a fair chance to come up with some real solutions and demonstrate to our federal partners that as a community we can work together. So thank you so much for your time today.
Next speaker.
Christine Kim.
Hi, I'm Christine Kim, and I just want to set the record straight on how this task force came to be for everyone here in this room and for the reporters who are present so that they can report accurately on this event. This was not formed at the behest of Burbank Airport. This task force was our congressional representative's response to our organization's request for help to get the FAA to take immediate action on the Section 175 requests that were sent by both airports to the FAA. Burbank's in December of last year, and Van Nuys earlier this year. Section 175 of the FAA Reauthorization Act puts an obligation on the FAA from Congress. They need to consider the feasibility of dispersal headings or other lateral track variations to address community noise concerns. Let me rephrase that. The language in the statute is shall. There is an obligation, and if they don't act, there's a large body of law about abuse of discretion if they don't act.
You have 30 seconds.
Feinstein and the others said, while the environmental assessment will address the long-term issue, it doesn't address the current noise complaints. I ask the FAA to work with my office, other elected officials, community groups, and Burbank and Van Nuys airports to find an immediate solution to that problem. So this is why we are here, for immediate relief. And we think that we need to go back to the historical pre-Metroplex flight paths before we make any changes in these flight patterns over our skies. Thank you.
Next, we have Vicki Herman.
Who is the next speaker?
Vicki Herman.
Good evening, Ms. Herman. Yes.
For the record. So tonight, I'm going to talk about who's responsible. When I make calls to my legislators and when I make calls to the airports, they say it's the FAA. They're responsible for this incredible disaster. So that means our tax dollars are paying for NextGen and FAA personnel to carry it out. Two key FAA executives are negatively impacting our lives, Raquel Gervin and Terry Bristol, both supposedly civil servants. The definition of civil servant is a person employed in the public sector on behalf of a government, department, or agency. A civil servant's first priority is to represent the interest of citizens, not airlines and their lobbyists. Terry Bristol, the FAA COO of air traffic in DC, she has played a key role in the deployment and integration of NextGen capabilities.
You have 30 seconds.
Okay, here's the deal. Our PAC dollars are paying her salary of approximately $276,000 per year, or probably more than that. And her benefits are far better than anybody in this room. Raquel Gervin. She is NextGen implementation. Based on 217 records, she is making over $200,000 a year with those benefits. So we are paying top FAA executives to destroy our health, our happiness.
Our next speaker is Cindy Essen.
I'm not done. Our homes.
Ms. Herman.
Our homes.
I know this is important to you.
They have chosen. Wait.
I understand
please, one thing.
that this is important to you. There are many other speakers here this evening
just say this.
who also want to be heard.
Please, your top executives.
Please call the next speaker.
They have chosen
The next speaker is
airlines
Cindy
over
Essen.
people. They have chosen airlines over people
Ms.
in health.
Herman.
That's it. I'm done.
Who is the next speaker, please?
Good evening. My name is Cindy Eason. I live in the hills of Sherman Oaks in District 4. My neighborhood is under assault by both Van Nuys and Burbank, and I have two comments this evening. My first comment concerns the composition of the task force itself. Why does the city of Burbank have 2 representatives and thus 2 votes on the task force? You know, this is especially troubling, given the obvious conflict of interest that elected representatives from the city of Burbank have. We all know that the airport is an economic engine for the city. You're looking for growth, you're going to look for more passengers, more airlines, and thus more money in the coffers of the city of Burbank. Why are there 2 of you on this task force?
You have 30 seconds.
The second issue that I want to discuss is a concept in the law called coming to the nuisance. You know what? None of us who are in this room came to the nuisance. That means when you buy a house next to a garbage dump, you don't get to complain about the smell. None of us, when we purchased our homes in all of these areas,
The next
came to
speaker
the
is John
nuisance,
Vernagus.
came to the nuisance
next
that our lives have been made by these actions by the FAA.
Thank you.
Following Mr. Vernagus will be Jeff Jacobs, Sherry Elkame, Elizabeth Gindros, Matt LeBate, and Cindy Blum.
Hi, I'm John, a resident of Sherman Oaks, and I'm not from an aviation background, nor am I a part of the community groups presenting solutions, but I did do some study and reading on the websites and would like to throw out some questions that perhaps our community representatives can help us get answered, from the FAA. And really it all nets to what everybody else is saying. Why can't we go back to the pre-Metroplex pass? And I'm more impacted from Van Nuys, so it sounds like future weeks bring more out than the Burbank. But as I looked at the records that LAWA produced, and they have on their website, they talk about this was implemented in 2017, and the boundary was moved from the middle of the basin up north, and community complaints went from 18 to 21 a month. LAWA said to the FAA, per these notes, we need to change this. The community's outraged. There's noise. So within 3 months, a new path was brought in as an interim solution. So they moved it back, as I understand it, to the middle of the basin. That's heroic.
You have 30
That's
seconds.
Good efforts. So now why are we struggling? Because when they came back, then I think a year later with a permanent solution, they moved it to the south of the basin, which is why all this traffic is now coming over the neighborhoods. So again, just a simple question, why did it have to be moved in the first place? And why can't it go back again since it was moved once out of community? And so three complaints a month went from 18 to 21. It was moved. We now have hundreds of complaints a month over the 18 that was originally there, and there's no action. So
Thank you.
Just
Next speaker, please.
Next, we have Jeff Jacobs.
Hi, my name is Jeff Jacobs. I'm a board member of Save Coldwater Canyon, but I'm speaking on my own behalf. I've lived near Coldwater and Ventura for 47 years. All of a sudden, I notice when I'm looking up, I can see the television screens of what the people are watching on the planes that are going by. I'm not necessarily speaking about noise, I'm speaking about a medical issue. I am a cancer survivor. The lower the planes, the more fuel, the more emissions that I'm going to be breathing in. So I hope you consider that. I'd also like to give the rest of my time, whatever is remaining, to Vicki.
We don't yield time in this meeting. That is one of the rules.
Okay, well, I'm sorry.
You can finish your time.
I would have given her the time. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Elizabeth Gindros. I'm sorry, Sherry Elkame.
Who is the next speaker?
Sherry Elkame.
Hi, I'm Sherry Elkame. I'm speaking quickly tonight about the devastating effects of noise on wildlife. Since the new flight paths are sending plane after plane low and loud day and night over the protected Santa Monica Mountains. A publication from the National Park Service states, in the wild, the ability to hear is so important for survival that no deaf vertebrate species are known to exist. In addition to producing sounds for communication, animals continuously detect sounds even when they're asleep. Appropriate soundscapes are important for animal communication, territory establishment, courtship and mating, nurturing young, and effective use of habitat. Scientific studies have shown that wildlife can be adversely affected by the high levels of noise. When these effects are combined with other sources of stress experienced by wildlife, noise can have important implications for the health and vitality of wildlife populations within a park. In an environmental impact study prepared for the Burbank-Glendale-Pasadena Airport and the FAA in preparation for a terminal construction in the late 80s, concern was expressed for urban and wild species of animals and their reaction to excessive noise. That
You have
report
30
states,
seconds.
primary effects interfere with animal communication. Secondary effects may include interruptions in important life functions. The greatest effect of noise on sensitive wildlife is probably the associated reduction of population size due to animals avoiding the area and preference for quieter territory. It's possible that local urban species such as mockingbird, goldfinch, bluebird, hummingbird, etc., avoid these areas due to the excessive noise of aircraft flyovers. And so we know when birds and bats and sensitive species leave for quieter territories, all we're left with are mosquitoes. The impact of noise.
The next
from
speaker is
cascade
Elizabeth
affects air
Gindros.
ecosystems.
Next speaker, please.
At my daughter's school, Carpenter Community Charter, it's an elementary school in Studio City, they're enduring the same jet noise and pollution assault that we're experiencing at our home in Studio City. Please come visit our school. I would love you to come and walk the grounds and the campus and see what is happening over 1,000 students at this school. See what you're exposing them to and how the low, loud, and relentless exposure all day long is horrific. More than 20 studies show that plain noise negatively affects children's reading and memory. Cornell University did a really amazing study called the Munich Study. I'd be happy to get you a copy of it, basically regarding how airport noise affects children's health and performance. The outcomes were staggering. Something you should look at. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
The next speaker will be Matt LaBate.
Hello, my name is Matt. I'm board member Upward LA. I live in Studio City. Thank you for hearing us in your work towards a fair solution. I want to share tonight 2 stats just for the record. Number 1, complaint count data on air noise, since Burbank doesn't release that data. In May of 2018, 1 month, 270 complaints. From April to July, each month of this year, up to 120,000 complaints, just to show scale. Second is low-flying airplanes and estimated pollution. My condo is directly behind Carpenter, which my son attends. I have some verified data that affects him and 1,000 of his schoolmates. We all know that studies kids' learning and health are negatively affected. So recently I built an ADSB receiver and installed it on my roof. For those of you who know, a receiver like this receives data directly from airplane transponders. I have a Google spreadsheet, I regularly email to the airport and my local reps. I started recording this data on April 26th. I'm recording only flights that are at or under the 3,000-foot mixing level, since that's where particulate noise pollution is the most
You have
negative.
30 seconds.
As of Friday, August 23rd, in the past 120 days, I've recorded 3,200 aircraft that have flown within a mile of Carpenter School at or under 3,000. It's alarming because you can multiply that out for the year. Using what's called the blue sky model of 53.3 pounds of CO2, we've estimated in 120 days, 90 tons of CO2 has been emitted over my house and Carpenter School, in addition to all the heavy metal and ultrafine particles. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Cindy Bloom. After her, we have Carrie Purcell, Lisa Petrus, Stephanie Westcott, and Magdalene.
Are those speakers present?
I'm present. I'm the third one. I'm the second last.
Amanda, would you read the
Cindy
names
Bloom.
again, please?
Sorry, they mispronounced my name, so I didn't recognize it.
Bloom is pretty easy to pronounce.
I know, well, it happened at my high school graduation too, but I won't get into that. Hi.
Good evening.
I'm Cindy Bloom, and it's very clear that we know that all the outbound flights have changed to the detriment of many, many residents. But what worries me, what about the inbound flights? Because as Shadow Hills Property Owners Association president, and I'm not here in that capacity, about 6 months ago, I started getting phone calls and emails from people saying, gee, have they changed the flight patterns? It seems like we're getting a lot more air traffic noise and low-flying planes. I thought, oh, no. But then I started hearing about Next Gen and then all the other problems that we were very well aware of. And so when you ask your questions, could you find out for us, have the inbound flights changed also? Because I have a feeling they have. And Next Gen was probably at one time a good idea on paper, but historically we've had good ideas that have gone bad. For example, the Corvair.
You have 30 seconds.
The Pinto, the Hindenburg. And what happened when those good ideas went bad? Did they continue to pursue them? No, they stopped it or they fixed them. So we're all a bunch of brainiacs. We're a lot of smart, thoughtful people. I think if they can fix those problems, they can certainly fix Next Gen to make it an appropriate program that's fair to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker.
Carrie Purcell.
Hi, I'm Carrie Purcell. I'm president of the Encino Chamber of Commerce. I want to thank the FAA, Van Nuys Airport, Burbank Airport, and the elected officials for the willingness to have this conversation with the community. I also want to thank the Van Nuys Airport staff and the airport tenants have always been supportive and willing to work with the communities surrounding the airport on issues from noise to homelessness to graffiti and trash removal in the areas. We do appreciate the partnership, and we look forward to figuring out this issue with the communities.
Next speaker.
Lisa Petrus.
Hello, Lisa Petrus, Sherman Oaks Neighborhood Council, Residential Area 4, which is from the 101 freeway to Ventura Boulevard to the west Sepulveda to Hazeltine. So our neighborhood is severely impacted by any changes that you may be considering this evening. I've lived in my house for 22 years. Recently, I put in double pane windows, extra insulation. I sleep with a white noise machine. I live very close to the 405 and the 101. We get lots of noise from the Van Nuys Airport. I'm woken up at least once or twice a week by planes coming in. I think the problem we have right now is that the people who are south of the boulevard are getting to experience what we've got to experience for the last 22 years. And that they say they want to share this. And that's exactly what is happening currently, is that we are sharing the noise with our neighbors to the south.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is her 90 seconds.
And I would also ask the council offices to remember that the 101 freeway, you have constituents on both sides of the freeway. The density is even more north of the freeway. We have hospitals, churches, synagogues, schools. We have parks. We have a wildlife sanctuary, bird sanctuary. It's not just the Santa Monica Mountains who are affected by this. We are all affected by this. And I think what's happened is the privilege of south of the boulevard are getting, finally, what we have been living with for 22 years. And they're finally having to share it. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I
Next,
know
we have
this is
Stephanie
important
Westcott.
to you. I know it's important to you, and I think we all understand why. But there are many other speakers who simply want their voices heard, and I think that is the fair thing to do. Next speaker.
Hi, my name's Stephanie Westcott. I'm a Burbank resident. I live southeast of the airport. We've been told that changing air flight patterns is really, really hard and takes a really long time. I can tell you it's changing now. You asked about whether or not flights could go east. As of 2 weeks ago, they are. I now have planes, 2 to 3 planes, including Southwest flights, flying over my house, past Buena Vista, towards the Rancho area. This means no place is safe right now. We don't know where the planes are going to go next. And changing the Sky Highway doesn't involve concrete, so it really shouldn't take that long. You put it on paper, and then you implement it. There are 6,000 people per square mile within the city of Burbank. There's over 7,500 people per square mile in Los Angeles. When we look at these pictures, we see this giant swath, and we're like, oh, that's just a little area. 6,000 people. That means wherever the flight is, there's potential of 100,000 people being affected by where you're flying this plane, because the noise just doesn't come out the back end. It ricochets off the mountains. Stand on Chandler Boulevard one night. See how often you're tricked thinking that a plane's coming over the Hollywood Hills? Nope, it's coming up from the north, but it's echoing and ricocheting all over this valley. Noise is not an annoyance. It's a physical thing that enters our space. Those who lived in the flight path understood that it was going to be there. I didn't know that. Studio City didn't know that. The kids didn't know that, which means the aircraft are committing crimes. They're trespassing, they're damaging our property, and they're physically assaulting us. If that was a person, we'd have them arrested.
Next, we have Magda Lane.
Thank you.
And they'll have a restraining order.
Magda Lane. After her, we have Lindsay Nesmith.
Would you call the names again, please?
Magda Lane. And then we will have Lindsay Nesmith, Abram Abrams, Larry Singer, Paul Hatfield, and Alex Isbicki.
Okay, I'm Magdalene, and many of the things that I was going to say have already been said. So there are just a couple of things that I'd like to ask the task force to take a look at. The Burbank Airport Authority study conducted by Landerman Brown concluded the volume of flights had increased 15% from 2015 to 2017. So my question is, the FAA 2018 draft environmental review uses the number of the 2017 flights as their baseline for the noise level. So according to Landry and Brown, they're already starting at a 15% higher amount of flights. So I'd like to maybe find out a little more information as to what really is the baseline. In addition, I'd like them to take a look at the FAA draft environmental report category exclusions on pages 13 and 14 and reconsider the categories that they have stated were considered to have negligible or non-existent effects from the proposed action.
You have 30 seconds.
Thank you. The current increased flight noise has impacted local filming, one of our major industries, home-based businesses, schools, children and their outdoor playgrounds, urban parklands, and native forest lands, and has seriously impacted residents' communities' quality of life. I respectfully implore the members of the task force to work together to produce a meaningful and substantiated report recommending a better solution than what is currently proposed and provide immediate relief to the surrounding communities and mitigate the potential future devastating effects of the proposed actions.
Our next speaker is Lindsay Nesmith.
Hi, my name is Lindsay Nesmith, and I am a resident of the Studio City Hills. I have two state documents. One is the noise enforcement team. Let's see, it says in the canyon that construction hours are between the hours of 7 a.m. and 9 p.m., Saturdays 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., and Sundays no construction. It also says that trash bins can be picked up between 6 a.m. and 9 p.m. It also says that deliveries can be made between 7 a.m. and 10 p.m. I am being woken up by airplanes at 6:50 in the morning, and they do not stop. So the other document that I wanted to share with you is my airport influence area disclosure. This is a state document from my 2012 purchase, my property purchase of my home. The property disclosure form says that my property is encompassed within, my property is not located in a mapped airport influence area, and that this includes future airport-related noise, overflight, safety, airspace protection. I'm so sorry, there's a plane flying over right now. Let's see. An airport influence area is defined as an area. Sorry, I cannot concentrate. But let's see. Let's wait for that.
Our next speaker is Abram Abrams.
Thank you so much.
Next speaker. Who is our speaker?
Abram Abrams.
Thank
Good
you.
evening. Thank you, everyone, and we appreciate being here. My position is totally different. I'm the emergency road service provider for Automobile Club of Southern California, and I'm the president and the CEO of Sherman Oaks Club Service, Inc. And the most essential part is, which is very important, it's a lifesavers for the members. They break down on the freeway. I service my company 405-101, and some members, they get on the phone to explain their breakdown location, cannot hear anything. So the drivers go up and down the freeway miles and miles, while the member is in the right lane in a danger. Sometimes you get the vehicles rear-ended, and most baby seats, they're located in the back seat. The car's rear-ended, they're emitting fuel, you have to go and save them and cut the seatbelt, get them out of there. So this is my question. Thank you, everybody.
You have 30 seconds.
Good night.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Larry Singer.
Hello, my name is Larry Singer. I am a resident of Toluca Lake for the past 15 years, and I'm a current board member of the Toluca Lake Homeowners Association for the past 3 years. I want to echo so much what others have said tonight and at the meeting a few weeks back, that the noise has dramatically increased in the past 2 years. I'm the first one to admit that I love the convenience of the airport, Burbank Airport, using it as often as possible, if I can, rather than dealing with LAX. But the dramatic increase in noise in the past 2 years is shattering and sometimes deafening. Many nights, more often than not, we hear the roar of the jet engines well past 10 p.m., which at one point was when the noise would stop.
You have 30 seconds.
Now routinely we hear the jets 10:30, 11, 11:30, and past midnight. That is not the exception. That is the norm at least 3 to 4 times a week. We knew when moving here that the airport was close by. What we didn't know is that the flight pattern would change, thus altering the noise, not to mention all the particles and everything else coming off the planes. The airport is 4 miles from my house, but there are times it feels like 4 feet.
Next
You can
Our
look
next
up.
speaker is Paul Hatfield.
We're asking you to please restore
you.
the flight path.
Hi, I'm Paul Hatfield. I served as president of Valley Village Homeowners Association for 4 years, and I also served on the Neighborhood Council Valley Village for 10 years, so I've been very active in the community. I don't like noise either, okay? I live in Valley Village. I'm north of the 101, and I don't see any drop in our flight patterns over our neighborhood. I've flown frequently out of Burbank, over 100 times in the past 4 years, and I see my house right below me. So to the extent anything has changed, it hasn't come from my neck of the woods. But let me say this. The views, there are two sides to this story. The views expressed by Studio City for Quiet Skies and Uproar LA to return flight paths over and north of the 101 will have adverse ramifications for Valley Village, Valley Glen, and those portions of Studio City and Sherman Oaks adjacent to the 101, probably North Hollywood as
You
well.
have 30 seconds.
You would think our local politicians would conduct outreach to reach those communities and let them know of the risk they face if a recommendation comes from this task force to move the flight pattern north. I would like to thank, by the way, Congressman Cardenas for his interest in our side of the story he wrote on behalf of us, the FAA. Trust me, if the consensus view of most of what I'm hearing tonight prevails, you will all be back in this very same room with a totally different audience, and they won't be as
Our
friendly.
next
Thank
speaker
you.
is Alex Isbicki. Following him, we have Michelle Allen, Deshelle Allen, Wayne Williams, Dan Feger, and Marion Jocks.
Thank you. My name is Alex Zbicki. I am a board member of Save Coldwater Canyon, but I'm speaking on my own behalf. As the gentleman prior to me just spoke, yes, you will have a new group of people that are here if these changes are made, but these are people that have already lived in this pattern and are aware of it when they purchased their homes and have lived through it. I myself, when I started in the San Fernando Valley, I was on the flight path of the Burbank Airport. Our family lived on Sherman Way in Whitsett, and we had an onslaught of landings constantly, but we knew it, and we were prepared for it, and we kept our mouths shut because that's what we bought into. In this case, we're talking about change. We're talking about a change in patterns of flight, noise intrusion, and pollution intrusion. These are things that we are suddenly being forced to deal with. You see people here speaking. Many of them are at their wits' end. They're shaking. They're shuddering. What is this, some kind of a lab experiment? How far they can go before they break
You have
down
30 seconds.
and deteriorate? Is that what we want to watch? That's why I'm asking. This is great that we're going for solutions. Maybe it's going to take a month or 2, 3 months, whenever, but we're asking now. Make a change to the prior flight paths so we can go on with our lives and not be broken down mentally and physically. Please do that now. Thank you.
Next speaker.
Our next speaker is Michelle Allen.
Good evening. My name is Michelle Allen. This is my son, Dashel Allen. He is 12. He is also affected by the change in flight paths. I bought my home 17 years ago with my husband. We had maybe 2 or 3 flights overhead. Now, I am not kidding, over 100 times a day, I press that air noise button. This morning, I got to sleep in until 5:13. That's not funny. It's not funny. I have to wake him up at 7 to go to school, but it's easy because this morning, 7:01, 7:03, 7:05, 7:07, 7:09, 7:11, 7:13, the Alaska Virgin flight was so low, I thought it was going to fly into my driveway. I live at 810 feet above sea level. I bought my home in the Santa Monica Mountains for the quiet and the nature. You have taken both away from me and my family. I live in a canyon, so one sound of the airplane goes for 3 minutes. You let me know when you're ready, bud. There is no respite with a curfew. Last weekend, Labor Day weekend, 2:13 a.m., 3:26 a.m., 4:52 a.m., and then a 6:22 from Van Nuys. These planes are flying horrifically, can't even speak, low over my home. I have anxiety. I sleep with a white noise machine, a blanket. I take pills. I give my kids melatonin. They can't fall asleep at night.
Next speaker.
You can go.
Thank you.
Well, I just want to say a few things about how I am affected by the airplanes and, well, okay. I can't do that.
Thank you. Next speaker.
I'll take his time because, no, I'm going to say one more
Next speaker,
thing.
please. Your 90 seconds are up.
Oh,
and
my 90 seconds
honestly,
are up? Okay.
Your voice is important. I want you all to know, but I want to give everybody else an opportunity
Okay,
to
then
speak.
read from what I say
And we're
here.
about 23 people into
You
the...
can say that you're flying over a tinderbox, that we can't insure our home for fire. Why don't you say
Let
that?
us go to the next speaker. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Wayne Williams.
My name is Wayne Williams. I'm with the Van Nuys Airport Citizens Advisory Council, and I'm speaking on my own behalf at this time. I actually am at the represent Councilmember Koretz on the council, and as I mentioned to you last time, I was very involved in getting rid of the noisy Stage 2 jets, thinking the problem had been solved. Bottom line is, thank you for being here and paying attention. Thank you to Uproar for a brilliant presentation today. What you also need to understand is that this is exactly the same thing that's happening at Van Nuys. Van Nuys and Burbank are jointly interacting together, and the FAA has acknowledged that, in fact, they coordinate accordingly. So what you need to do is do everything you can to not only stop the flights from flying in the new zones that they are flying in the Santa Monica Mountains, but I look forward to doing a presentation to you about establishing a voluntary nighttime curfew for both airports that will put an end to the night flights that are destroying the kids' lives and our lives and the lives of everybody in this valley, not just in the foothills. I thank all our council members and our senators and our congressmen for doing what you're doing, but understand, the FAA is really not going to act until you put them under a financial pressure and legal assault to change this problem now.
Next
Thank
speaker.
Our next speaker is Dan Feger.
Dan Fager again. The third objective that I suggested to the task force was Operation Jet Noise, JT&T and north of the 101 stop expansion. Operation Jet Noise is intended to find a permanent RNAV open SID procedure that will make nearly all jet departures from runway 15 turn west before crossing the 101 freeway. Further, it would seek additional measures to permanently reduce noise impacts on both Burbank and Los Angeles residents, including modifications to RNAV open SID departures to protect residents living south and east of Van Nuys Airport, seeking congressional action to allow acoustical treatment for residents living under RNAV flight tracks, even if they're outside the 65 DNEL noise contour, voluntary use of runway 26 departures at night, which was part of the authority's Part 150 program, constraints on Hollywood Burbank Airport growth, and shortening runway 15
You have 30
to enhance
seconds.
airport safety and discourage airline use of larger aircraft, such as the 737 MAX 10, which was never considered for the replacement passenger terminal. Thank you.
Next speaker.
Next, we have Marianne Jocks. Following her, we will have George Weisenfeld, Roy Wiegand, Robin Greenberg, Jane Go, and Eric Robinson.
Hi, good evening. My name is Marian Jose. I'm the Executive Director with United Chambers of Commerce with 18 member Chambers strong. Van Nuys Airport, as you know, provides many jobs associated with the airport and on their properties. I won't do the math, but I guess that would be millions of dollars to our economy. Not only does the Van Nuys Airport support our communities financially, but they also have a presence and get involved with us. They care about our communities and personally and professionally, and they will do the right thing. But we are adults and we all can work together and come up with a solution. Thank you.
Next speaker.
Next, we have George Weisenfeld.
I live in Colfax Meadows of Studio City on Peck Avenue, and I get every flight that's up there coming right over my house. Frankly, I've been there 15 years. My daughter and grandchildren live around the corner from me. And I have to be honest that this past year is the first time I said, you know, one of these days, one of those planes are going to come down. And I think it's time for us to sell and move. I'm shocked to even think that, but it's a reality, and it's got me concerned, and I hear all the solutions and non-solutions and so, and what I think is the reality is those planes are going to be up there. Burbank Airport is going to keep going, and I think the only possible idea would be spread the flights, because I made a quick chart here, and
You have 30 seconds.
it's a wonderful chart. You could all see I spent a lot of time on this. Okay, so I'll just say 657, 703, 710, 715, 716, 722, 723, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. 24 flights over my house in a very short amount of time, and that's absolutely not acceptable, okay? Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Our next speaker is Roy Wiegand.
Roy Wiegand, Burbank resident, Burbank for quiet skies. We did try to sell our house because we did buy it near an airport. That wasn't very possible last summer. A lot of people loved our house and our street, but because of the new changes, in spite of the deniers on City Council and the Airport Authority and even Burbank residents, that didn't happen. So we are in our house as we speak. For those of us in Burbank who are now impacted by the jet noise much more severely than in the past, now we're in the noise footprint, not according to the airport, but we are. We can walk across our street and talk to our neighbors who got all their soundproofing and everything done. That's literally where it ends. We can't, and all of our neighbors can't south of there. Since noise is now the airport's #1 issue, can this be fast-tracked? The triple pane windows, the soundproof doors, for all of us that are now in the footprint at the airport, on the airport's dime. Can it be fast-tracked like the increase in flights and volume and noise dBs has been fast-tracked since 2016? Will there be a need for a new noise study? When will that be? When will those results be turned in? Can that be fast-tracked? Can these soundproofing mitigations please be completed prior to airport adding Amazon Air? Increases to all the commercial flights, charter flights operations, increase in numbers, and your ad campaigns begging for more people to fly out of this airport. Attached is one a day, I'll pass this out, where there are 144 flights, most reading in the 70 to 80 decibel range. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Robin Greenberg.
My name is Robin Greenberg. I am the president of the Bel Air Beverly Crest Neighborhood Council, a neighborhood of 27,000 homeowners located in the Santa Monica Mountains. I would like to thank the 2 council members that are here tonight that help us on a daily basis, Paul Koretz and his staff, and David Rue and his staff. I would like to speak with you about the potential wildfire and wildlife threats from these low-altitude aircraft and helicopters that are now plaguing the Santa Monica Mountains, from Encino to Studio City on both sides of Mulholland. Our board approved a motion in support of the City Council's Wildland Urban Interface Hazard Mitigation Task Force, which is being set up to identify and to reduce wildlife threats in the city of Los Angeles. A similar motion was passed by many neighborhood councils and community councils of the West Side Regional Alliance of Councils. I am handing out, with me now is a friend handing out a copy of the motion. I submit that this issue of hundreds of aircraft now flying in and over the Santa Monica Mountains, which is a very high fire hazard severity zone, needs to be raised in the discussion of potential wildfire threats, because now the risk of aviation accidents in the mountains has been greatly increased.
Next speaker. Thank you.
Hi, I'm a 29-year resident of Studio City, and I most certainly would not have bought my house if I...
Your voice is very, very soft.
Oh,
can you lift the microphone?
Yes. I am a 29-year member of Studio City. I would most certainly not have bought my house if I had any idea that I could be suffering what I am now suffering. Apart from that, however, thank you to Uproar LA for their incredibly comprehensive presentation, including also some of the financial aspects of all of this. If you look at the financial records of the Burbank Airport, it looks like the year 2008 was their banner year. That was before, long before Next Gen, and it was before, I think, possibly before the 737 MAXs and all that sort of thing, but they were doing very, very well. So I don't really think that asking them to twist and turn earlier and to do what they had been doing before, which is to gain altitude quickly, is going to harm the airlines particularly, or the airport financially. They made a perfectly good profit and stayed in the market when they were having difficult years after 2008. So I think from the financial standpoint also, if you will look carefully at that data, this should be a very doable thing to make this fix.
Our next speaker is Eric Robinson. Following him, we have Ari Engelberg, Heidi McKay, John Bick, Jim Hardy, and Lisa K.M. Davis.
Hi, I'm Eric Robinson. I'm a resident of Studio City. So there's been a lot of talk about the planes as they're taking off. One of the things I wanted to talk about that really hasn't been brought up is that sometimes when the wind changes, the airports change how the planes should land. So where I live in Studio City, about 300 times a day, there's a plane taking off over me. But several times a week or so, the flights will change, the flight paths will change. Rather, let me say, the direction of the aircraft will change. The flight path doesn't change. I'm not in aviation, but as I watch the altitudes on all these planes, not only visually, but also pressing my air noise button and seeing what they come back with, any flight that's coming into land is coming in at a much, much lower altitude than a plane taking off. Mr. Fager could probably expand upon that, or someone in aviation. But these flights that come in that are landing are 1,500 feet elevation.
You have 30 seconds.
I live at 700 feet elevation. These planes are even lower than the ones that are taking off. In my neighborhood, we have an incredible high fire risk where we can't get normal insurance for our houses. So my question is, can we have some time and some questions about the planes that are coming in on these exact same flight paths, but are landing and are coming in over this mountainous region and really creating even more noise, even more fire risk? Thanks so much.
Our next speaker is Heidi McKay.
First of all, I would just like to say to the Valley Village gentleman and to the woman who lives near the freeway, we're asking to just go back to what was. So if it was so bad then, I would like to see their noise complaints. I would like to see if there's over 1.2 million complaints prior to this change. I doubt that's the case. So I'm here to talk. Last time I mentioned the echo effect and you asked for data. So I just want to speak to that. The sound effects in the canyon. This is just a, oh, thank you. This is a copy of just part of what the, yes, those are my handouts.
These are
by the
all
way.
put on our
Yes,
table.
I handed those out to you.
Thank you.
This is just a map of part of what the planes are flying over. And sound bounces off surface such as canyon walls and returns so you can hear it again. Lucky us. Just as a mirror reflects light,
You have 30 seconds.
So hard surfaces such as canyons reflect walls. Here is what we are dealing with, and that's just part of it. I also have in there for you the fire zone map. This is exactly where the planes are flying over, right over the fire map. And goodness, it went fast. The parks that are included in this that should be protected are the Beverly Glen Park, Briar Summit Open Space Reserve, Coldwater Canyon, Dixie Canyon, Fossil Ridge Park, Franklin Canyon, Fryman Canyon, Long Ridge Park.
Our next speaker is John Bick.
MRCA and Will Acre Park.
Thank you, Ms.
Thank you.
Hi, John Bick from Studio City. By 2030, there'll be a $45 billion in cost reductions for the airlines. I call it follow the money. I am not pointing at anyone in this room. This is a structural issue in the relationship between large corporations and the public, and it is by design. Southwest flies a majority of the flights out of Burbank. It is one of the 10 most respected companies in the world, and they've made a profit every single year since 1973. In the year 2000, Southwest Airlines removed 3 peanuts from every individual pack, saving them $300,000 a year. They are in this for every dollar they can make. The company has 59,000 public employees. There is no one person there that is an evildoer. It is just simply the way corporations operate from the top down. We, here in this room, are in the midst of a predatory delay by large American corporations. They forecast all of this. They knew we would be in a room somewhere. They analyzed the savings versus reputation, and it was a no-brainer. The whole idea that they didn't know what the public response was going to be is BS. The fact that we are discussing the relationship between flights and topography and that a study needs to be done is ludicrous and another layer of BS. If we are going to last on this planet, we have got to start changing the structures, and there is no reason why we cannot start now. Somebody that has the access and the clout needs to call up the airlines and ask them to get in this room. We are not peanuts.
Next speaker, please.
Next Gen is a microcosm. It is a tiny thing in the grand scale of things. But tiny things matter because many tiny things can add up to big things. We all need to do these tiny things. We humans, we public neighbors, we are the corporation.
If you are going to continue speaking, I'm going to ask you to sit. I'm going to ask you to sit down now.
Your public, you are our neighbors. We can be an example. We can work together. We can here in this room. Together, all together, we can help each other. We need you and you need us. We are all the public. We live under the same sky and we breathe the same air. Our very survival depends on doing these things in new ways. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Jim Hardy.
To quote the futurist Alex.
I'm going to ask the officer to remove you from this room now.
Sir, we have another 40 speakers to get through before we can leave tonight.
Is my microphone on?
Our next speaker is Jim Hardy.
90 seconds. My microphone, there it is. Thank you very much. Your voice is important. This man's voice is important. We have 90 seconds. I am going to ask you to please not interrupt the proceedings of this meeting tonight, or I will close it. And we have several people who wish to speak, and each and every one of you has an important voice in this matter. And I would like you all to have the opportunity to speak. Would you call the next speaker, please?
Jim Hardy.
That's me. Thanks for having me. Isn't democracy an interesting thing?
It is. It's great.
Thank you for having me. I'm Jim Hardy. I'm a resident of Sherman Oaks, but I'm speaking tonight as director of Coldwater Canyon Park, Tree People's Home atop Coldwater in Mulholland. We're interconnected by paths and proximity to Willacre Park, MRCA's Willacre Park, Fryman Canyon Park across the ridge, Franklin Canyon Park. Over 1,000 acres that tens of thousands of people come to every year to do what? To escape the city. If you look at Yelp and all those things where people write their opinions, hikers write their opinions, the words appear over and over again. They come for peace, tranquility, quiet. They want to escape the city to this fantastic gift that we have, the Santa Monica Mountains. They come to escape for peace, tranquility, and quiet. And that peace and tranquility and quiet is,
You have 30 seconds.
is being shredded by what has happened over the past couple of years. It's being shredded. You have people who come there to sit on the trails, to be by themselves, to be with nature, and planes are zooming overhead at our elevation at 1,050 feet. It's shredding the very purpose that tens of millions of dollars were devoted to create that parkland. Tens of millions of dollars, federal dollars, state, county, through the MRCA, creating that parkland for people to escape.
Next speaker,
Our next
please.
speaker is Lisa K.M. Davis. Lisa K.M. Davis. Following Ms. Davis, we will have Alan Levy.
Ladies and
Randy
gentlemen.
Dodge, Sandy Patton, Wendy Morris, and Jody Kadam.
Hi, my name is Lisa Cahan Davis. I actually live at Linkersham and Ventura and Coinga Pass. There is a residual sound effect in the echoes, as Heidi had mentioned. I sat outside all Sunday, well, not all Sunday, I did have a life, but I heard how the planes go over, and I timed it, and it's 1 minute and 58 seconds before the next one comes. And that 1 minute and 58 seconds is I'm not underneath it like my friends at the top of Santa Monica Mountains at Berry, where the planes are literally, you could see seat 14D. But there's those of us that live outside of the pathway but feel the effects daily and nightly. 12:33, 12:35, 12:37 in the morning. I hear the flights. What's the cost of next gen? The price
You have 30
is lost.
seconds.
The prices are physical health, our potential fire hazard, not getting insurance, our mental health, our wildlife health, not being able to have sustainability in the ecosystem. There's a climate crisis. We have 101, 405, and the 134 with the cars, the helicopters, and the planes. Our environmental study, I ask you, when is that going to be done? The cost of next gen should just be the cost of our quality of life, which should be normal.
Next
Our
speaker,
next
please.
speaker is Alan Levy.
Also a resident of Sherman Oaks, and I would also request that the flight paths be put back to where they were before. But I had one question, a procedural one, is that I haven't really heard anything from the FAA. Are they not responsible for making any sort of presentation? Have you heard from them, their own presentations in private, or when do we hear from them?
Thank you. Next speaker.
Our next speaker is Randy Dodge.
I'm a resident of Laurel Canyon. I know I'm probably one of the only people here from Laurel Canyon, but even last night as I was walking, I was at the top of Appian Way, and I heard a big jet. You could hear it, it reverberated through the entire canyon. And this was at like 10:30 at night. How in Laurel Canyon, the most sacred canyon here, how are we getting the planes from the Burbank Airport flying over us? It's not only that, we've got helicopters going over us all day long, little planes that we never had before. I also went to, I go to Runyon Canyon a lot, and I sit up at the top. I watched all the planes taking off from Burbank. All of them come right over the hills. None of them are going in that direction. They never end up. None of these planes are going to Hawaii. They're all turning.
You have 30 seconds.
They all turn, they turn right, they go to Vegas, they go to San Francisco, but none of them are going that way. So why are they flying that way?
Next speaker.
Our next speaker is Sandy Patton.
And Amanda, can you go through the next 2 or 3 speakers?
Following Ms. Patton, we have Wendy Morris, Jody Kadam, Lori Kadam, Peter Baczynski.
Hi, I'm Sandy Patton. I live off Benedict Canyon, our street on Glen Ridge, and our street ends at Mulholland Drive. And just like everyone else, I did not move into this house thinking that this would ever happen. It wasn't even a glimmer of a possibility. I grew up in the hills, but when I first bought my first home in my 20s, I bought a house near Lake Balboa, right near Van Nuys Airport. That's what I could afford. It took me most of my adult life to get it together to be able to afford to move into the hills. What I'm experiencing now over the last 2 years is way worse than was ever when I knew where I was living fairly near an airport, not right there. And I'm just, this just seems like the same as what everyone else is saying. Just put it back to what it was, the historic flight path. It worked for all that time. It's already been done. It's not like you have to explore how to do it. You know how to do it.
You have 30 seconds.
The FAA seems like they need some good PR right now. This is a great opportunity for you to take us out of this disillusionment that we have with pretty much all of government and put something right, do the right thing. Pretend it was you and your family living here.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Our next speaker is Wendy Morris.
Good evening. My name is Wendy Morris. I'm the president of the Bel Air Hills Association. That's south of Mulholland. There are over 900 homes there, thousands of residents, and we are all suffering badly from Burbank and Van Nuys airports. Burbank all day, Van Nuys all night. It never stops. They all come at us from both sides, from no planes virtually at all when I first moved there 32 years ago to over 200 a day now. It's unlivable. And I wanted to address the question that the Burbank mayor asked at the end of the last meeting regarding why does noise concentrate and focus on the mountain topography. One reason is the mountain walls serve as reflectors. Instead of continuing to travel forward, sound is reflected back off the walls. So one hears it the first time and then again as an echo. And it means that this given sound lasts longer.
You have 30 seconds.
And layers upon the next wave of sound. Another reason is that the sound is focused on certain places as a result of specific local topography. A well-known example of this is a natural amphitheater, such as the Hollywood Bowl. Another very important factor is why aviation noise seems so much louder and intrusive is that the relative quiet when there is no aviation is much lower in the mountains. That's why people go there for hikes and quiet peacefulness. It's 40
Our next
normally
speaker is Jody
instead of
Kadam.
50, and 60
Next
is
speaker,
very
please.
high against 40. I handed out some literature. It is a letter from Mike Fewer.
We all have it.
Explaining the same things.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jody Kadam. Jody Kadam.
I'm right here. Just give me one moment. I'm sorry.
Shall we go on to the next speaker while you're organizing?
Jody and Lori are together, so can you go on to the next, and as soon as we're ready to go.
Peter Baczynski.
Hi, Peter Baczynski from Sherman Oaks. When will we hear from the FAA?
Thank you.
When will we hear? This is great, but the fact is that Burbank Airport and the Burbank Airport Authority, LAWA, The mayors of all the affected cities, our elected officials, federal and local, have all formally petitioned the FAA to address this problem and fix it. Why hasn't anything been done? Why do we need lay people to give you all the facts and figures that you have to fix this problem? This is a big delaying tactic. Money pays for politics. The Department of Transportation Inspector General's report does not reflect well on NextGen. It is a shit show. It was sold a bill of goods. It's not delivering on anything. When will the FAA act? The time is now.
You have 30 seconds.
I don't need it. We need results in 30 seconds.
There you go. Next speaker.
Jody Caden.
Next speakers.
I can go. Hi, my name is Jody Caden, and I live right below Mulholland off of Beverly Glen. And I just want to play for you guys a little bit of what I hear every day. Today, I was woken up at 4 a.m. in the morning. I'm sorry, can you guys hear me? It's a little tough to hear. But this is what happens about every 30 seconds to 2 minutes. What I'd like to do is invite you guys over. I have my business cards this Sunday. I want you to come over for a half an hour. I will have brunch for every one of you. I want you to hear what this sounds like. Can you play something else, please? I'd like you to hear what this sounds like, because unless you're listening to it, this is what I hear outside my house. It's taken outside my house every 30 seconds to 2 minutes. This is what I hear. And not only is it loud, it shakes you.
30 seconds?
They have vibrations. And your quality of life is greatly diminished. So would you all come up to my house for just a half an hour just to listen? You can't do anything unless you understand the problem. Here's the business card.
Next speaker.
My email is on there. I would appreciate if you guys could email me and let me know if you could come.
Our next speaker
Thank you.
is Lori Caden.
Lori
Following
Caden.
her, we will have Susan Ashley.
Lori would like to take her minute and 30 seconds and just play this.
That's fine. In just a moment, let me call up the next 5 people who will be following her. So after Lori, we will have Susan Ashley. Rosalind, excuse me, can you pause that for a moment, please?
Amanda, turn it to me.
Our next speaker after this will be Susan Ashley, Rosalind Dahl, Mark Livinson, Kira Durbin, and Michelle Floman.
How much time is left?
A minute.
Okay.
Got a minute left. Blast it.
Is the speaker finished? No. Okay. Are we on to next speaker?
Yes, Susan Ashley.
Before you start,
hi.
I'm gonna stop for just a moment, ladies and gentlemen. I want to find out how many speakers we have left.
"22 speakers.
All right, let's start.
Hi, I'm Susan Ashley. How much were you begging for relief right now? And you heard that for a minute and a half. We live with that every 30 seconds for 18 hours out of the day, non-stop. How furious would you be at this meeting right now to hear that it's going to be months and months and months before the FAA decides to do anything, when we know that when the winds change, you can change the direction of the flight paths in an instant. So you could help us today if you felt like it. You could easily go back to the past that were, or at least disperse them a little bit. How much would you be begging and pleading to make that stop? 18 hours a day. Okay, a couple of things I want to touch on very quickly. We keep talking about, oh, it's business. They have to have business. It's commerce. Well, you know, everybody deserves to have business. Well, I just want to say that if Bloomingdale's...
You have 30 seconds.
Oh, come on. If Bloomingdale's was polluting the entire San Fernando Valley to make a profit, you'd shut them down. But it's okay for the airlines to do that. They're allowed to pollute the entire valley and risk the lives of every single resident here to make a profit. And $40,000, I'll write you a check. If this will stop, for $40,000, that's what NextGen's profit is per year. We'll write you a check for 40 grand right now and stop it. I just want to mention real quickly, I have things to hand out.
Thank you.
Did you know that in 2003?
And
just wait. I had the noise thing.
We have 20 people who still wish to speak.
I just want to hand something
And I
out.
understand your issue. We do. We get it. We heard it. But let's let everyone have a fair opportunity to speak. Thank you.
I just want to hand this out. It's the plane
And I'd
crash
like to
that
ask
happened
one
in
other thing of the audience this
2003 in the
evening.
Sherman Oaks neighborhood, exactly where
Would you call
250
the next
planes are
speaker,
a day.
please?
There was a plane crash in 2003 in our mountains.
And while that
Santa
speaker
Monica
is
Mountain.
coming up, I would like to ask you all, please. Amanda is calling the speakers in order of the cards presented to us. She is doing a very good job, and I would ask that you kindly refrain from making comments with respect to her doing her job.
My name is Rosalind Dahl. I'm from Sherman Oaks. I live in the Santa Monica Mountains. How is all this safe and for whom? We live in a very high fire hazard zone. I want to know how sending hundreds of A320s and Boeing 737s and other commercial jets as low as 2,200 feet over very high fire hazardous mountainous terrain with dry brush is safe for anyone, including MAX 8s that used to fly over our area until they were grounded. So accidents do happen. I want to know why it is safe to have departure routes from Burbank and Van Nuys crisscross over the highest peaks of these mountains, and why this has to happen in an area where we can't get private property insurance and have to rely on the California Fair Plan. I want to know how it is safe to now send hundreds of helicopters at levels of 200 feet above this terrain. I want to know why, when I complained to Burbank Airport about dangerous, reckless private aircraft operators who have flown as low as 275 feet over the top of our mountain, and why I don't get a response.
30 seconds.
And I want to know why the departure routes are only, or the current and proposed, they all result in the aircraft concentration over this very high fire hazard zone. I implore you to revisit compliance with FAA regulation Title 14, Section 91.119. It's called Minimum Safe Altitudes. And I implore that you consider that in your decision making and how responsible it is to continue as you are. You can fix it, you should fix it, and I urge you to demonstrate that our lives matter.
Mark Levinson.
Good evening. Thank you. I'm Mark Levinson. I'm active in most of the groups here in the Valley. I would like to say a couple of things that I hope were fairly obvious to everyone, and that is the airports are concerned with safety as much as everyone else in this room. They haven't developed practices and procedures for airlines to endanger people. They are community activists. They are a major part of our community. They support our schools, our nonprofits, our businesses. But in addition, they are complying with regulations put forth by the FAA. And I think some of the councilmen had the right idea. Let's devote a session to hearing what they say, answering the questions that have been properly framed, put to them. Let's find out about why these changes are necessary. If they are, what are the reasonable alternatives to what we have now, how we move forward. Change always takes place, but as change takes place, it has to be reasonable and proper. To blame
You have 30 seconds.
Thank you. To blame the airports alone for this situation, if it needs to change, they'll happen. I know that the airports also have monthly meetings to address constituents, complaints, observations. They are good neighbors. They should be respected. Thank you.
Next speaker, please.
Our next speaker is Kira Durbin.
Good evening. I hope everyone's still awake for a few more minutes. My name is Kira Durbin. I'm with Sherman Oaks Neighborhood Council Outreach. Number one, I would like to recognize and thank the extraordinary measures that the individual residents and self-made groups have gone to. Thank you for everything you've done. Number two, I would like to thank everyone who mentioned all the implications. And when I say just noise, please don't think I mean just noise. What I mean is there are a lot of implications, not only noise. Number three, I would like to thank you all for being here and taking us seriously, because I can tell you there have been other meetings where that has not been the case. So I very much appreciate all of you listening and understanding these people's concerns. Number four, I hate to say this, but I would encourage you, if you can,
You have 30
especially
seconds.
our council member, thank you, to go to these people's residence. That reminded me of being in Afghanistan. That was awful. If you have a chance, go to your constituents' houses. Hear that. And number five, I would just like to call out and especially thank my council member, David Rue, for your support in your letter towards us last night. The voluntary curfew could provide some relief immediately.
Our next
Thank
speaker
you
is
very much.
Michelle Florman.
Thank you.
Following her, we will have Star Irvine, Andrew Stokja, Joanna Drury, Mike Moynihan, and Ray Birkland.
Michelle Florman, Sherman Oaks. I've been a resident for 20 years. Let me cut to the chase. Congress, the FAA, local government, and Burbank commissioners and the airlines are responsible for the devastation they have created. The delay tactics, denials, shifting the blame, kicking the can, so to speak, is intolerable and inexcusable. Congress funded FAA's NextGen in 2007 without transparency, accountability, or oversight. How many people were demoted within the FAA because of this? NextGen is a perfect case study in government dysfunction, corruption, and incompetence. The FAA is knowingly poisoning residents and the environment, directing jets to fly lower, thus increasing greenhouse gases. Wow, government is irresponsible, destructive, yet they push a Green Deal. Reduce the number of flights, ascend rapidly, fan out, and restore the original historic flight paths. Clean the air. Time to FaceTime instead
You
of
have
air
30
travel.
seconds.
Airports are the #1 causes of greenhouse gases.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Our next speaker is Star Irvine.
Hello, how are you all doing? Anybody? You okay? Yeah, do any of you live in the area where the noise is? Could you raise a hand if you do? One person? Does anybody go to the Ralph's at Magnolia and Vineland? Anybody go to the Habit at Camarillo and Vineland? Anybody eating in the area? No, you don't have to have a house to feel this. You can go to any of these businesses and sit in the parking lot for 10 minutes. I've been a homeowner for 25 years. I have a 100-year-old house. I am in Toluca Woods and NoHo. I currently lost a 3-year resident in my house. I rent rooms. 3 years. They moved. And you know why, right?
You have 30 seconds.
Thank you. And I just want to invite you all to move into my house because I have a room for all of you. And you can sit in my backyard and sit on a sofa. It's comfortable, and you can feel. Over there, you over there, all of you, right? You can feel the plane. You can feel the furniture move.
Next speaker.
Our next speaker is Andrei Stokchka.
Hi, I'm Andre Stoic. I live up in Bel Air Ridge, and I'm wishing for the good old days when my wife and I would sit in front of our house. We were considering buying the property, and we'd open the car doors and listen to the mountainside, and it was so peaceful. It was so different from being down in the city, and now that's all gone. I'd like you to focus, if you can, on going back to the old system right away, because what's going to happen is you're going to toss the ball to the FAA, and they're going to go around and just try to figure out what to do. Well, I submit to you, they're the people who got us into this mess in the first place. They're not going to be somebody who can come up with a plan to get us out of it. A plan is going to be evolved. It's going to take a period of time. It's going to take some testing. I don't think we have the patience for that. So go back to the original system, the old system, and do us a favor. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Next speaker.
Our next speaker is Joanna Drury. Following her, we'll have Mike Moynihan, Roy Birkland, Elaine Newman, Janice Black Warner, and Doug Warner.
I'm Joanna Drury. I live in Encino.
I'm going to ask you to speak right into the microphone.
Okay, I live in Encino, just below the reservoir, and we have very major airplane problems as well. I sat outside for half an hour this morning, and my timeline is like all the timelines here, 7 o'clock, 7:03, 7:05. We have the problem too. What I'm having a very difficult time getting my head around is the fact that major decisions affecting our quality of life, like the FAA's decision to redirect flight paths over our neighborhoods, can be made without consulting the community. It's like we don't matter. We're just collateral damage for progress, greed, or whatever reason the FAA has for completely upending our quality of life with an insufferable noise from airplanes. The FAA may have assumed we'd get used to it, but you don't get used to it when it's imposed on you. I know because I grew up.
You have 30 seconds.
I grew up near an airport and never paid attention to noise from planes because it was expected. It's completely different when it's imposed on you. When a thief breaks into a home and steals valuables, it's considered to be a crime, and the thief is caught, if caught, is punished. In my mind, robbing thousands of residents of their quality of life is a more horrific crime. What is more valuable, an expensive necklace or our quality of life?
Our next speaker is Mike Moynihan.
Good evening. I'm Mike Moynihan, Burbank resident, co-founder of Save Burbank Neighborhoods, co-founder of Burbank for Quiet Skies. This has been an issue for us for many, many years. I bought my house in 2003, 1 mile south of the airport. I knew I was buying near the airport. I was buying near Burbank Airport, not Heathrow Airport. So to all the clowns, and we'll see one later tonight, who say, you knew what you were buying, you should keep your mouth shut. To those clowns, I would like to remind them, I bought at Burbank Airport, not Heathrow. We've been asking for help from our city council since early 2016 when Measure B was on our ballot. Measure B was airport expansion. It passed largely due to lies spread by the airport that it's not expansion, it's 14 gates to 14 gates. That lie, well, got that measure passed. The reason that's deceptive is the new terminal will be larger, 150% or more the size of the current terminal. That's expansion, airport expansion. 14 gates right now are too close together to get 14 planes in at those gates all at the same time, but with airport expansion, we'll be able to do that. More flights, more noise. Just the other night, July 23rd, once again, I was at our city council meeting asking for help from our city council. And the response from our mayor, who's now the chairperson of the noise task force, her answer to me was, it's not an airport expansion. It's 14 gates to 14 gates.
Our next speaker is Roy
We need to be
Birkland.
honest with the community if we're going to get anything done with this issue.
Roy Birkland.
Next speaker, please begin.
Hi, yes, it's Ray Birkland. It's probably my lousy handwriting you couldn't read. I live on the east ridge of Benedict Canyon in Sherman Oaks. Been there for over 40 years now. And I'm a retired airline pilot. And back in the early 80s, for a couple of years, I flew a lot out of Burbank. And at the time, most of the departures are out of the south. And you do an early turn and come back to Quiet Eaper, it was called, which was you'd pull the power way back and you'd fly back out of the valley. Of course, now they aren't doing that anymore, and I never have gotten a good answer to why everything's gotten extended farther south. You know, one reason I heard was that is to keep out of conflict of the LAX traffic and all that, but going farther south, you're more in
You have 30 seconds.
with LAX. So I don't know why they can't go back to the early turn, stay north of the Ventura Freeway, and it would keep it a lot quieter, especially if you come back to a Quiet Eaper on there. Thank you.
Next speaker.
Our next speaker will be Elaine Newman.
My name is Elaine Newman, and I'm a longtime resident of Encino. As an Encino resident, I look forward very much so to hearing from the Encino Neighborhood Council at a forum such as this, because we in Encino are suffering as much as everybody else in this room. We are suffering particularly from Van Nuys Airport. And it's daytime, I'm awakened almost every night with the windows shaking from planes coming over from Van Nuys Airport. It used to be that it was over the Sepulveda Basin. Now it's over all of the homes that are north of the Ventura Boulevard. In addition, many homes in Encino and everywhere else are along the 101 freeway.
You have 30 seconds.
It has been suggested that the flight path be moved along the freeway. That would be not only a travesty to add to the ongoing problem with the pollution and all the noise that we in Encino also experience. I beg you to take all of this into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Our next speaker is Janice Black Warner. Doug Warner will follow her with Myrnie Lynn Ross, Mike Nolan, and John Kendall.
Hi, good evening. My name is Janice Black Warner. I've been a resident of Encino for the past 2 years. We moved from the city, hoping for calmness in Encino, but unfortunately these low-flying, loud, 24/7, every 2 to 3 minutes planes are ruining our mental health. We're exhausted, sleep-deprived. Our peace of mind is compromised. Our home should be our sanctuary. Instead, it makes us irritable. We cannot go outside to eat, garden, read in peace, exercise. We didn't vote on this. We would have never, ever bought our homes. The county will lose money because the reduction in home value will be affected. Our property taxes will have to be lowered, so the county will lose money by our devalued homes. I did write a letter to the FAA, but unfortunately I got a very heartless response. The FAA thanks you for sharing your concerns. You should expect not to.
You have 30 seconds.
You should expect not to receive any further FAA response. Your complaint is very similar to the last one you submitted, so unfortunately, they don't care. And I hope you care, because we've been to so many meetings, and we appreciate all of you, but our lives are compromised, our health is compromised, and if you have to live every 2 to 3 minutes with these planes, especially in Encino, it's crazy, and it's affecting all of us.
Next speaker.
Our next speaker is Doug Warner.
Hi, Doug Warner. I live in Encino. You all have heard and seen the metrics. You've heard information. You've heard complaints. You've heard sounds. You've heard everything. You've had a lot of time to evaluate the information that's been presented to you. But in the end, it's up to you to leverage your knowledge, to leverage your constituents, and to leverage against the FAA. Standing up here and expressing ourselves to you creates a nice ear. We appreciate that, but now it becomes time for you to do your job. Support the constituents that you ask support when you run for office. There's millions and millions of data that's available to you. If it's available to you now because now you're only looking at it, then great, then act on it. You've had a lot of time in the past to review. We know that we have Mike Fuhrer, we have the mayor of Los Angeles. There's enough in front of you to make some solid decisions and represent the constituents that are putting you in a place to do so. Please act wisely, please act responsibly, and help us, because we're all reaching out to you for our help. Thank you for your time.
Next speaker.
Our next speaker is Myrnie Lynn Ross.
Would you read the following 2 or 3 names, please?
Mike Nolan, John Kendall, Kenneth Weatherwax, and Leonard McDonald.
Thank you.
I have no speech. I have questions. My questions are for you right here, those of you who came on this panel. How many of you got an invitation and wondered what was this about? Could you raise your hand if this was a new subject? I think it is for some of you, maybe they're not here right now, because of the questions that have been asked. If you think that you're doing your job now, I hope you are, because my question, and I've heard some of you speaking, we know who did the homework here. We know who's doing the research. We need these people. Those of you who may be appointed just by your boss or someone and you came in to fill in a slot, how much homework have you done in the last 2 weeks since we had the last meeting? I beg you, if you're not going to do it, if there's anyone sitting here that isn't, recluse yourself, get someone in there that's willing to fight with us, because our lives are at risk. And if you don't, all of you, I welcome those, all of you that are helping, but guess what? People are dying. I'm a senior, I've lived here since 1981. Okay, I've watched what's happened. Seniors are at risk and children the most. I'm not saying no one else is. They're going to die sooner. And it'll be at
Next
your
speaker,
hands
please.
and anyone who doesn't stand up.
Mr. Nolan. Thank you for providing the microphone, officer.
Thank you, Chief. That's our police chief. We used to call him Captain Eddie when he was in the Burbank PD.
That's our police chief. That's right.
My name is Mike Nolan. I want to talk first to the elected officials from Los Angeles and also to the elected officials from Glendale and Pasadena. Get off your ass. Tell the FAA. Tell your congressman. I used to be a staff puke. I used to work for J.B. Potter when we had trouble with the Air Force, 1969. Worked for John Ferraro. They picked up the phone and called people when they had to. This is time for action. This is not time for screwing around 18 months or whatever it is to do an environmental impact report. The environmental impact report should have been done before this started. Now, one of the things that bothers me is I live in Burbank now. Burbank's being blamed. We're not blamed. We're not the ones that did this. The FAA did it. They have to knock it off now. Do the environmental report, do whatever they want to do. But don't mess with the airport now and these people's lives and their properties. It's just ridiculous that you're allowing this to happen. Pick up the phone. To hell with letters.
Our next speaker is John Kendall. Then we'll have Kenneth Weatherwax, Leonard McDonald, Ed Burnham, and Joe Capoletti. John Kendall. We'll move on to Kenneth Weatherwax.
Sherman Oaks. Thanks, by the way, for moving to a more appropriate venue. I was one of the people who was boxed out of the last meeting for most of it by the fire marshal and an armed police officer. My question really is, and I'm a lawyer and I have a lot of experience with administrative law and groups like this. Where is the FAA's useful participation? I just think that this is not really that much of a solutions group unless it has people who have expertise from the FAA attending, such as airspace designers or noise ombudsmen, air traffic control specialists. Where are they? Have they been asked to attend? Could they be? And could we please have stated in the next meeting what the response
You have 30
to that
seconds.
request is? I would really appreciate that. And I would also say that I think it's wrong to play around with the time you're giving people to speak. This is not a game, and you're turning it into a bad game. I think that you should take a higher priority for public comment instead of spending 30 minutes quibbling about the date of the meeting and then say, oh, we're going to have to cut the time for people to speak. That's really wrong, and you should stop doing that.
Our next speaker is Leonard McDonald.
You say
Thank you, sir.
Have a voice.
Thank you.
But everything you're doing
Next
says
speaker,
much
please.
more loudly.
Leonard McDonald.
Thank you for participating.
You're welcome.
Leonard McDonald.
Thank you.
Okay, we will move on to Ed Burnham. Joe Capoletti. Oh, sorry, Ed Burnham first? Okay. Mr. Capoletti, you'll be next.
I live in Encino, just north of Ventura Boulevard. We suffer a great deal from Van Nuys Airport. The private airport, the one with the private planes. I just want to ask you folks one question tonight, and I hope you'll think about it before you go to bed tonight. How many more people from this wonderful San Fernando Valley will have to be sacrificed on the sacred altar of commerce and expansion?
Next we have Joe Capoletti, then Lisa Capoletti, Clarissa Lurkenfeld-Keller, Jeffrey Wank, and Carl Ware Lindgros.
Good evening, Joe Capoletti. Thank you for your time. I appreciate this opportunity to speak in front of you again tonight. I'm here to appeal for fairness. I'd like to express my strong opposition to directing the preponderance of flights over the 101. I think it's a terrible idea. This simply shifts the problem. The exact same concerns to a more densely populated area, all the same issues remain: pollution, disruption to people, pets, and wildlife. Here, too, there are highly flammable homes and trees. The 101 is already a high-traffic corridor. The current flight pattern is untenable. I agree with that. I understand that, but let's not just problem shift from one community to another. The 405 and 101 area is constantly assaulted by the whir of helicopters. Last night, nonstop for 4 hours, starting at 3:30 in the morning. Let's talk about the feasibility of fairness. What value do we associate as a community of people here in this room to the happiness and the quality of life of others? As a community, how do we feel about improvements to our lives,
You
knowing
have
that
30
those
seconds.
changes have a direct and immediately deleterious impact on the lives of thousands of others? Think about that question. Not unknown others, slightly more distant neighbors perhaps, coworkers, extended family members, fellow taxpayers, your constituents. Please look at the big picture. Wield your influence and your power with an awareness and a benevolence toward everyone. I've never said this before, I've never said this word or written it down, but I did tonight.
Our next speaker is Lisa Capoletti.
The word is NIMBY.
Ms.
The
Capoletti.
assertion that I deserve
Thank you, sir.
a quieter neighborhood because I think I
Thank
paid
you.
more for my house than you did is at best very small-minded.
Lisa Capoletti.
Who is our speaker?
Lisa
Lisa?
Capoletti.
Yes.
All right.
Hi. I'm Lisa Capoletti, and I'm a resident of Sherman Oaks. I live north of Ventura Boulevard. I'm on the Sherman Oaks Neighborhood Council also. It seems to me that the noise won't stop until the flights are stopped or curtailed. So it's really a matter of where the noise will be, not a matter of whether or not lives will be affected, but rather whose lives are not all lives of value and importance. What I hear being advocated is moving the flight pattern to be over other homes, so it becomes someone's problem and devastates other lives. It's not that lives won't be devastated, it's just whose lives. It is not the question about how to shoulder this together in the valley rather than just relocating the flight patterns to another area. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Clarissa Lurkenfeld Keller.
Amanda, would you read the final names, please?
Jeffrey Wank and Carl Ware Lindorfs.
Yes. Hi.
Good
Please go
evening.
ahead.
My name is Clarissa Lurchenfeld Keller. I was here 2 weeks ago, and I am with the gentleman and many other people who are needing action now. I have a question. I don't know if Councilman Rio could answer that. Is it even allowed to change the zoning of the homes we live in? Is that allowed? You change the zoning. We now live in an airplane massacre over our houses. This will eventually happen. It will happen. We are in the Sherman Oaks Hills since 13 years, and we are part of the community who are bombarded over 100 flights a day, both from Van Nuys Airport and Burbank. So that would be a question. I have my son at home by himself right now at 15 years old. I just
have
hope
30
none of
seconds.
this is going to happen. Think about the money. Is the money worth more than the people? If everything's polluted, if we don't die from lung cancer from these emissions, we will pollute the earth and we will realize eventually that we cannot eat money. Thank you.
Next speaker, please.
Jeffrey Wank.
Would you call the name again, please?
Jeffrey Wank.
I don't believe he's here. I believe Mr. Linfors is approaching the podium.
Okay, then Mr. Linfors is the last speaker.
Good evening.
Yes, good evening. I'm surprised there's still somebody here. I've been a resident of Burbank since 1945, so I have a little bit of history that nobody else here seems to have. Where was I? Everyone here is to complain about the noise, and everyone is extremely angry. and I'm angry about people being angry. There's no neighborliness, no lack of shared goals, and everyone's oversensitive. But surprise, even high-tech airplanes make noise, and most people here would like to have airplanes not make noise.
You have 30 seconds.
So they can still fly. In the early 50s, I went to Luther Burbank Junior High, and you haven't lived till you've seen and heard a 4-engine, 6,000 horsepower, unmuffled piston engine go over. And when you talk about accidents, the current airplanes climb out at a dangerous 20, 30 degrees, almost to a stall point. So if a flock of birds came,
thank you,
or parrots,
Mr. Lindfors,
they would have a big crash.
Thank you. Do we have any more speakers, Amanda?
No, we do not.
That concludes the public comment. Jean, do you have any closing comments?
I do not.
Task members have. Councilman Koretz.
Yes, thank you. I apologize for my voice. I'm feeling pretty ill today, but I didn't want to miss this, and I can't believe how screwed up this whole situation is. But the one thing I'll speak to is something that could be done even between now and then, I believe, which is wherever we place the route, one of the things I've heard tonight is that the voluntary curfew isn't working where we have it, and I don't think we even have it in Van Nuys. We obviously should at least have that at a minimum, but I think we need a more aggressive curfew. We literally should look at charging the airlines when they fly during those curfew hours and either fine them or charge a substantial fee unless it's an emergency landing. If it's not something that is out of the ordinary, clearly when people say, well, we always hear planes at 4 in the morning, we always hear them at midnight and then 12:15, those are not out of the ordinary. Those are airlines that are not playing by the rules we're trying to set. They're saying, well, it's voluntary, we'll just do whatever we want. I think we need to be more aggressive, and I would ask the folks with the 2 airports to look at whether they can enact such a policy change.
We've reached...
And I honestly, I'd have to ask the question, I don't know if the FAA interferes with even that step, but if it's something an airport can do, even if we put back the old routes and we make it more difficult for the old people in those areas, I'd say not as bad because the topography is better, but it shouldn't be happening anywhere. People shouldn't have 4 a.m. flights to deal with, even if it was in the old route. So what can we do to change that?
Okay. We are going to conclude the meeting tonight. I want to thank you all for being part of this discussion. We still have a shared interest in reducing the noise in the areas that are discussed. It is the task force job to listen, to research, and ultimately decide on consensus recommendations to give to the FAA. To view these presentations tonight, they will be posted at the Burbank website and also the Van Nuys Airport website. They will be posted as quickly as possible. The agenda for the upcoming meeting will be distributed within 72 hours of the meeting itself. Our plan is to have the next meeting take place on Thursday, October 17th at 6:30 p.m. at the Burbank Marriott Hotel. I want to thank you all for being here this evening, and I want to thank you for participating in this task force and task force members. I also want to thank you for being here this evening, and the staff, and Amanda, and Jean, and your staff. We are adjourned.